21 in total. I've got online.
We are currently in quorum, so I invite members to return to the chamber.
Two online. 24, 25, 26.
So, I would like to just... No, it's fine.
Deputy Gardner.
I would like to give an notice that I would have a medical appointment this afternoon and I will be joining after online.
Thank you. So we resume the debate on P52, the prosecution of illegal taxi services. And Deputy Scott, you indicated a wish to speak.
Yes, please, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, I am aligned with the intention of this proposition in addressing unlicensed taxi services. I acknowledge the risks.
Sorry, Deputy, we're having trouble hearing you. I wonder if you could move a little closer to the microphone, or.
Okay, is this better?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Sir, I am aligned with the intention of this proposition of addressing unlicensed taxi services. I acknowledge the risks and also the point that Deputy Ward has raised regarding the desirability of looking into why islanders are using such services given the risks. And I sympathise with his views that review of the licensing regime is desirable. Only maybe it is the number of reviews over the years on the same subject that have come to nothing that needs to be investigated. Where I don't feel entirely aligned is with this proposed solution to the problem identified by Deputy Curtis. Its focus is on making offenders accountable, which may be seeking more government resourcing than is necessary. A different approach could be cheaper and more effective, and I'll explain why. Other members, including the Council of Ministers, have made the point that unlicensed taxi services already are illegal. It's not the ability to prosecute that is the problem, rather than the difficulty with enforcing the law. The proposition has been amended to refer to further support of the investigation of illegal taxis by the Jersey Police. I don't have a particular problem with that part. The amendment that uses the words that this will be with the aim of increasing the potential of successful prosecutions for unlawfully driving passengers for reward. The picture I have in my mind is of the extra resourcing that may be needed for the police to trawl through online platforms to find the offenders. That may be time-consuming and difficult, and we know that there is a huge demand on police resourcing already.
We're struggling to hear you. Could members please be a bit quieter?
Right.
Thank you. Please continue, Deputy Scott, sorry.
Thank you. The picture I have in my mind is of the extra resourcing needed for the police to trawl through online platforms to find the offenders. That may be time-consuming and difficult. And we have great demands on police resourcing already. It's already been raised in this debate that some internet users have false identities. I have been working on an online harms law. Its intent is to require information that is illegal under our domestic laws to be removed from the internet. So I wonder if that might not be a cheaper and more effective solution. I would be grateful if the proposer would speak to this point in her summing up. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Scott. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Sir? Yes, Constable of Greville.
Thank you, sir. I will be supporting this proposition, but with a caveat. I believe in the safeguarding of young people getting lifts home or to a venue. I believe very strongly in their safeguarding and their safety. But I'm still of the belief that it's going to be very frustrating to try and administer this law and indeed prosecute, but for obvious reasons. But my overriding thoughts on this is I have 2 daughters, and the very thought of them coming home in an illegal lift late at night appalls me, sir. So I will most certainly be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Conor. Any other member wish to speak on Constable St Bernard?
Thank you, sir. Like my colleague, the Constable of St Saviour and the Constable of St John, I have a bit of experience of dealing with our colleague taxi drivers and fully support the proposition. I would say, sir, that if it stimulates, should we say, modernisation of the existing taxi service, it won't be a bad thing. I think we've seen Uber services in other countries. They haven't come over here. But I think our taxi companies or rank taxis need to emulate what they do. People want to know how much it's going to cost. They want to know when their taxi is going to arrive. And that is the way of the modern world. And I think I glean from what the present Minister says that is happening, and I look forward to it, sir. Thanks. So I will be supporting the proposition.
Thank you, Conor. Deputy Tadier.
So probably the shortest speech I might make. Thank you. The reason I support this, sir, is because I can see exactly what it's trying to do, especially now that the amendment has, I think, has helpfully been adopted. I think it can be summarised like this. We don't want to criminalise young people who are not doing anything wrong, and indeed it may not just be young people, but we do not want to condone anything that might be illegal. I think that's exactly what we're trying to do here. So it means that if youngsters or anyone are giving lifts for free or just getting a bit of petrol money and it's voluntary and they say, look, you know, I'll give you a lift to St Mons, and there's some money for the petrol, that's fine. Doesn't need to be declared, I don't think. But if you are effectively operating a taxi service and you don't have all the safeguards, the regulation, the health and safety, the registrations, that's a legal taxi driver would, that's not acceptable for a whole host of reasons which has already been outlined. So absolutely happy to support this.
Thank you, Deputy Tadier. Any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Lehegara.
Thank you, sir. This is actually my contribution, but also on behalf of the infrastructure as well. It's quite clear that for a significant period of time, work has been done with the taxi industry in order to achieve some things that people may raise concerns about. And in relation to, they've obviously reintroduced sum up machines and app commonplace despite a slow start to that particular thing. There's obviously new people coming in, there's new ranks, customer service is also the focus. Mystery shopper and focus groups used to measure customer service. There's 417 active licensed drivers. And there is a long time since any complaints have been made. What I would like to say, I appreciate that some members may think that there's challenges in relation to the prosecution of some of these offences, but I think the thing is that we want to try and actually stop the offences in the first place rather than try and prosecute. And it's always got to be about putting things in place that is actually going to do that. When people talk about, oh, well, what about young people giving lifts to friends? I'm not so young now, sir, but as a 17, 18-year-old, that was commonplace. Today I'd pick up the boys up the road, tomorrow they'd pick me up. So it was always that, and that's how the dynamic was of it all. And you would, one person didn't drink, and over a course of a weekend, you'd all swap and interarrange. We didn't actually exchange money, really, because actually we all took a turn. And those that didn't drive would then have given some money. So I think this is very, very different. And, I have concerns about people getting home late at night. And so I think this is a journey that we need to go on. We need to try and stop this from happening in the first place. We need to encourage other, younger people maybe who want to go into the industry that are more happy to work late at night because, you know, as I've got older, maybe I don't want to be working quite so late at night as I did before. So I think it is a balance. We need to continue to work to ensure that we have good facilities that are reasonably priced for all people to get home late at night, in order that we protect public safety, sir. Thank you. And I will be supporting this.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Any other member wish to? Deputy Morrell.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, and sir, I will be supporting the proposition. But I just wanted to pick up really where Deputy War left off, and that was to say that I do think the proposition is only dealing with part of the issue, and that in the sense that it's a proposition which talks about the stick of enforcement and prohibition. It doesn't talk about the carrot, which in my mind would be looking at the regulatory system that we have and adapting it to the more modern world, sir. And the reason I say this isn't specifically because of the age of the regulation or the law. It's because, in my mind, and I think this is likely to be borne out if we were to go and speak to people who use Jersey lifts, the primary reason Jersey lifts exist is because of a market failure. And this proposition doesn't deal with the market failure side of things at all, sir. It just deals with, you know, enforce the law against those who are breaking it. And I understand that, and I don't complain about that side of it at all. But there is a market failure here, sir. People have moved away from using regulated taxis because those taxis are not meeting their needs. Now, I'm not going to talk to the price side of it because I think there is reality when you're regulated and you are bound by certain rules, you have a certain cost base that you have to cover. And obviously Jersey lifts therefore are able on the market side to undercut because they're not bound by the same level of regulation, so that they're able to potentially, I assume, to have a price difference. But this isn't about the price difference, sir. It's about the need and the demand. And there's demand for taxi services. And I, like many people in this assembly, have often been found that it's difficult to get a taxi at certain times, that the taxis are not available in the way that we need them. I remember one particular night coming back to the airport. It happened to be Battle of Flowers night. There wasn't a single taxi at the airport. And there were hundreds of people getting off aircraft, but not a single taxi. And I think I remember taking a photo of the situation, sending it to the infrastructure minister at the time. And obviously, when we did finally get a taxi and spoke to the taxi driver, he said, "Oh, but we can't get through town." And so the issue there is, well, you know the Battle of Flowers is happening. You need to adjust things so that there are people on the right side of the tunnel able to get to the airport. And so there is a real piece of work to be done to address this market failure, because until that market failure is addressed, we will continue to have people using Jersey lifts or using other similar services. I don't think we should sit here thinking that when we pass this proposition, the whole situation is going to clear up and it will all be fine. I just fundamentally don't believe that's the case, because the needs of the public will still not be being met. And so, sir, I just strongly implore the infrastructure department to work on the future of the Jersey taxi sector and how it needs to look, because I think whilst there has been reforms over the last 8 to 10 years, and we've heard about how many more active licenses there are, it's still the case that many islanders, when they need a taxi, which are often the anti-social hours, are not able to get them. And as long as that persists, there will be other ways of getting taxi-type services in the islands, because the enforcement alone will not solve this problem, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Morrell. Deputy Rannoff.
Yes, sir. I've moved to rise actually to 100% agree with Deputy Morrell and Deputy War, because I do think that there is a very significant other lens to look at this through. And I would urge the Minister likewise to, or whoever follows, to engage in this with a view to solving the issue of how do we get the taxis services, minicab services onto the streets of Jersey that we want at the best price that is reasonable to achieve. The Deputy mentioned a story about travelling back from the airport on Battle of Flowers night. I tried to come back from a friend's house in St. Juan to Pittipore, which is a distance of about 4.5, 5 miles, and the fare, there was a wait of 2 hours.
and the fare was equivalent to a reasonably priced flight to London. So we do have issues, and for the public, half the public are sitting around thinking, why don't we have Uber or an equivalent? That's what they actually think, a lot of people. And we should be responding to that. And as Deputy Morell so accurately said, we need to deliver a service that works for people. Otherwise, there will always be ways found around. And I'm reminded of what happened when digital music first came along. Services, some people old enough will remember things like Napster and LimeWire. And they were hugely successful because the industry failed to provide a service that the consumer wanted. And ways were continually found around. The music industry kept trying to squash them, Ways were found around it over and over again until they finally got the message and put in place their own reasonably priced, very accessible working systems. And the reason we have this problem is because there is an unmet market need, and explicitly so in one case. I remember a letter to the Jersey Evening Post from a taxi driver that said, if you think we're going to go to the water splash at midnight on a weekend to pick up drunk teenagers, you've got another thing coming. They have, there's a segment of the taxi market that actually abdicates has removed itself from meeting a need. I would want to place on record that every taxi driver I've ever interacted with in Jersey has been excellent. And I've actually also had some very good conversations along the lines that you always have good conversations with taxi drivers. Yeah. So I do want to put that counterbalance in, but the central point I would make is much more about carrot than about trying to demolish trying to understand the reasons why people want something and what exactly it is they want. It should be the absolute focus.
Thank you very much. Any other member wish to speak? Deputy Ward. Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. It was interesting to follow the last two speakers. I don't want to bash taxi drivers. They're trying to do a job. It's on all sorts of hours. There is regulation, and they are here trying to do the job. And I understand. I do understand about the regulation. You may have what's called, I refer to as more than a corner of the truth there from the previous speakers, and I would agree with you. I too have been to the airport, and there's been a long queue for taxis. There haven't been any. So I thought, what am I going to do? And you know what? I got on the bus because the bus was there. And we have a good bus service, which segues me beautifully, sir, into perhaps some wide alternatives, which is in 2019, I brought to this assembly a free bus service and it was rejected. And I finally got the under 18 bus pass, which was accepted. The under 21, to extend it to under 21, it was a tied vote and therefore did not win. But we were extending the ages of people who can get bus services very, very cheaply. Perhaps we need to extend the bus service itself, because the last bus you can get back, the main bus 15 from town at St Brothers, because I looked it up, is at 11:30 at night. It's just after the pubs close, but perhaps younger people, younger than me, I have to go to bed early nowadays, sir, get my beauty sleep. Not that I need it, obviously. Thank you, you don't need to laugh at that one. It may be a bit later. There was also an amendment to the government plan in 2023 to direct some of the money which is in subsidising electric cars into subsidising bus passes, so that adults, everyone could get a bus pass for £200 a year. That was rejected by this assembly. So we have tried other things and they've all been rejected. And now we just talk about, well, let's look at regulation and everything will sort itself out according to the free market. And it does seem to me what people are suggesting is what we need is perhaps the worst parts of the gig economy that's happened in the UK in order to solve a problem on this small island. So we have to be very careful what we wish for. I was worried about the original proposition because of for a couple of reasons, and I will be supporting this, just to preempt, put that in before people start being unhappy with me, but just simply because I wasn't entirely sure I was going to be enforced. And it does stay with me. We have had a number of things from our police service who, are concerned about the policing of the VAUG requirements, certainly in youth policing. There's headlines about the cost of youth policing in the papers today. Policing all sorts of things in our society, but this is another one that will need to be added to that, particularly. So we have to be realistic about what we're going to do here and whether or not it will be productive. I certainly, sir, don't want to criminalise young people, and it does seem that every time we talk about this, we say, oh, people don't pick up drunk teenagers from St Wands. I don't think really it's as much the drunk teenagers that are the problem as drunk people in general, whose behaviour can be inappropriate. So let's not demonise our children constantly and our young people. What was I saying? Let's not criminalise those young people who perhaps make a really sensible decision, whereas they go out in a group and one of them doesn't drink and drives, takes their car so they can get about, and they give a bit of money towards petrol money. It does say that in the proposition, I recognise that, but I want that on record, that I really think we need to be careful that we don't do that for young people and they're aware that that's the case. If this stops dangerous habits, dangerous processes, then of course we must support it. But it's okay for us to say that in this assembly and vote for that, but action needs to be taken in an appropriate way. And I can't see how that's going to happen yet, I must say. So I am in a position of voting for something which I am concerned as to how it's going to happen, I must say. But I will also say again, sir, the other option is to extend our bus service on this small island to later, to more people, make it absolutely affordable, because that is the way you get people about, particularly young people, safely, collectively, together, and in ways in which is not only regulated, sir, but is there all of the time, so that we know how to get people home when they need to be. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. The next speaker is the Conotable of St Warren.
Thank you, sir. So I think what we really need with this is to actually look at the proposition that says prosecution of illegal taxi service. We already know, according to the amendment, that it's already against the 1935 law. What we need to be looking at is how we're going to prosecute these people. With the amendment that's been accepted by the Deputy Curtis, I said, is most important because it actually widens and broadens the whole aspect, and we need to be looking at a way that we can prosecute. Looking at problems with taxi service and bus services is not going to actually address what we're actually trying to discuss this afternoon, sir.
Thank you, Conotable. Deputy Balash.
So I want to follow Deputies War, Morell and Renouf. I think there has been a failure to bring not only the administrative structure up to date, but also I think that a whole lot of deregulation would be of benefit. My problem, sir, which draws me to my feet, is that I don't think that the amended proposition really addresses the principal problems. And I am also uncomfortable with subscribing to a resolution which calls for, and I quote, increasing potential of successful prosecutions. I don't think that as a legislature, it is our function to be concerned with the success or otherwise of prosecutions. It's not something that is our business. It's a matter for a different branch of government as to whether the evidence is sufficient to justify a conviction. So while I agree that the legislation and administrative arrangements are in need of review, I don't agree that the purpose of that review is to bring young people to book. And for that reason, I shall be abstaining when the time comes for a vote.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and I call upon Deputy Catherine Curtis to reply.
Thank you, sir. I thank all members for their contributions. But there has been quite a lot of contributions, so I don't think I can really respond to each one. So Deputy Scott asked me to address a point about the online position. So I can assure Deputy Scott that the police are very keen to tackle this issue. They already have the digital forensics unit and are well used to searching through technology. The other main point that's been mentioned by Deputy Waugh, Deputy Morale, Deputy Renouf, is around the current regulatory system. So this proposition was intentionally kept narrow because it's a very complex matter. It's been something that's been in the background as a problem for quite a long time. If I tried to bring too much into the proposition, it would not work. So we've got to focus on one part at a time, and this is the most important part, the potential danger for people from not trying to limit what's growing into a very big business, which is full of risk. So, you know, there are lots of other things that could potentially be done about regulations, and there's nothing stopping any states member from working on that, or nothing would have stopped them from doing so in the last few years. So that is a little bit of a sort of what about argument, you know. So the focus of this is to try and limit what's growing into a dangerous, risky position. So I think that's all I have to say. I hope people support this.
A point of could you please give way to a point of clarification?
Deputy,
Yes.
do you give way?
Yes.
Deputy Scott.
Thank you. Thank you. Just the point I was making to the deputy, and I think we are aligned that we both want to reduce this practice, is that the online harm law that I'm working on seeks to enable people on this island to take down, to require the taking down of illegal content or content that is against the law. And on that basis...
So, point of order, I think this constitutes a second speech. It doesn't sound like a clarification.
Yes, I was...
well, it's actually...
Can you get to the point of clarification, please?
The deputy didn't answer my question whether this is the right way to go about it when the site itself could be taken down under laws that we are currently working on.
I think this is straying beyond a point of clarification, Deputy Scott. So I'm going to ask...
Thank you, sir.
Yes. Please continue, Deputy Curtis.
So just to say, I do thank all members for their contributions and hope that members support the proposition, and I ask for the appel.
Thank you. The appel has been called for. I ask members to return to their seats. And if members have had the chance to return to their seats, I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can announce that the proposition has been adopted. 36 votes pour, no votes contre, and 4 abstentions.
Those abstaining, Deputies Balash, Rose Binet, Alex Curtis, and online, Deputy Scott.
Thank you. So we move on.
Sir,
Deputy Morale.
sorry to interrupt. I do apologise, sir. I was wondering if I might make a proposition, sir, regarding P54, and it is a proposition to the Assembly, which is the continuation of agricultural and rural and marine support. and it was to ask if I could move that to the end of the order paper, sir, because, well, that's the proposition I would like to put before the Assembly. Would you mind if I do that first of all, sir?
Could you just outline the grounds for why you wish to move
I
it?
didn't want to talk, why I said I didn't have to. So there is an amendment from Deputy Miller. As Minister for Treasury and Resources, Deputy Miller isn't here to present that amendment. And I think it's only right that she is here, she be here to have the opportunity, and I believe we're going to go into Monday. So I think, and I know Deputy Miller will be here by Monday, and so that is the intention. And yeah, and yes, the Assistant Minister theoretically could, but I don't know that that's the ideal situation in this case, sir. So I would just ask the Assembly's leave to move it to the end of the order.
Thank you. Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does it? Enthusiastically. Does any member wish to speak on the proposition?
Yes, sir. May I speak?
Deputy Poirier,
yes, thank you. I was hoping that my proposition would still come at the very end of our agenda, at the bottom of the list. But I wonder if the Deputy Morales proposition will now come after mine, which is not ideal for me. But
we
just checking.
We haven't decided this yet.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Poirier, your proposition, I don't currently have it at the end of the list.
Sorry, close.
So I have your proposition listed after P56, which is statutory duty to future generations. So unless you are making a proposition to move it down the list, yours currently doesn't appear at the end of the list.
Can I make a proposition, please?
We haven't yet finished the debate on Deputy Morell's proposition. So,
if I may say, that would work very well in the sense of we deal with my proposition and then separately Deputy Poirier's proposition would come afterwards, after mine.
right. Does any member wish to speak on Deputy Morell's proposition? Deputy Luce.
I'm happy to support that, sir, but I have to say I'm a little confused. I thought I was looking at consolidated paper, which had this Deputy Morell's proposition coming after ground solar, which is going to be our next one.
It does, yes. And he's asking it to be moved from that position to the end of the list.
And Deputy Poirier's was not at the end of the list either, sir, because
No, I've just made that point. Does any member wish to speak on Deputy Morell's proposition? Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. No, I hope members think it is fair that I briefly say it's less than ideal to be alerted one proposition on about a change in the order paper, and I'm sure the Minister will know that my own proposition is directly after. So for me, it's a rather large impact on whether I was planning on to speak when, on what, or the ones coming up. So I would just say, if members have changes to make, that they are duly informed well in time. That's a message to the next Assembly now, because clearly it's the last one. But it is less than optimal, knowing Deputy Miller's calendar we've known for a while now. And I just want to make that point that just from a point of courtesy that maybe these things can be considered in the round.
Very well. Does any other member wish to speak on Deputy Morell's proposition? If no member wishes to speak, with those members in favour of the proposition kindly show. Those members against? Well, the proposition is adopted. So, Deputy Poirier, do you wish to make a proposition as regards the order of your proposition?
That's fine, sir. Thank you. That's fine. Thank you.
Very well. So currently, Deputy Morell's proposition is at the end of the order paper. You could make a proposition to move your proposition to follow his.
I can't hear you. Sorry, I'm going to try and focus on you, sir. Sorry.
Yes. So currently, Deputy Morell's proposition has just been moved to the end of the order paper. You could make a proposition to move your own proposition to follow after Deputy Morell's. So Deputy Morell's is the second last, and then yours is the last, if you wish to do so. Do you wish to make that proposition?
Yes, sir. Thank you. I would wish to make that proposition.
And would you like to outline just in brief why you wish to make that proposition?
why, because I was prepared to come towards the very end of the table, and if Deputy Morales goes after me, then there will be a shift, just as the Deputy Alex Curtis has mentioned. So I would like to stick to where I was meant to be. And because I was hoping that my proposition would be heard on Monday, but moving any closer further up is not going to benefit me, but I'm happy to do so. Thank you.
Is the proposition seconded? Yes. Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Gorst.
So I fully understand the Deputy's rationale, and it seems to me, sir, that providing both are taken on Monday, as far as I'm concerned, on behalf of the Minister for Treasury and Resources, it doesn't matter whether it's first or second, as long as they're both on Monday. So I'm quite happy to support the Deputy in her request.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? No other member wishes to speak. I close the debate. With those members in favour...
Call for the appel.
Yep. Very well. The appel has been called for. So a vote pour... A vote pour is for a vote that Deputy Poiret's proposition is moved so that it appears last on the order paper immediately after Deputy Morel's proposition. So that is a vote pour. So I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can announce that the proposition has been adopted. 35 votes pour, 2 votes contre, and 1 abstention. So, Deputy Poiret, your proposition is last, Deputy Morales is second last, but both on Monday. Very well. So we move on to the next item of public business, which is the restriction on solar ground mounts on agricultural land, which is in a response to a petition. It's P53. It's been lodged by Deputy Tallier of St Brelade. The main respondent is the Minister for the Environment, and I ask the greffier to read the proposition. Well, we haven't got to that. Oh, yes, yes, of course. Yes, Deputy Tallier, I'm reminded that you've lodged an amendment to your proposition. Do you wish to take your proposition as amended?
So I'd very much like to move it as amended, but unless any member objects, I think that's the most expedient way.
Is the members content to take the proposition as amended? Yes. Members are content. So, greffier, I would grateful if you would read the proposition as amended.
The states are asked to decide whether they are of opinion, A, that there should be a presumption against solar ground mounts on agricultural land. B, to request the Minister for the Environment to consider strengthening protections for the loss of agricultural land to solar ground mounts in the next island plan. And C, to request the Minister for Infrastructure, in consultation with the Minister for the Environment, to bring forward a policy framework to promote the installation of solar panels on all suitable States of Jersey-owned buildings.
Deputy Tallier.
Thank you, sir. So, although I was tempted to ask to move this to the end of the order paper as well, I thought that might be a bit too much shuffling of the cards. So I am going to keep this fairly simple. I don't want to oversimplify it, but and there will no doubt be members who will introduce complexity, if not complication, to this proposition, which has now been amended, and I hope they do that constructively, because I think there is perhaps more to it than meets the eye. But certainly, for my part, it is quite a straightforward proposition. And the reason I've put in an amendment is that I did receive feedback from members who attended the briefing that the petitioners put on for us. And also I took into account other members who were having conversations with me saying, look, I agree with the spirit and the direction of travel you're going into, but it's a little bit too inflexible at the moment. And when it comes to solar panels on agricultural land, I generally agree that they shouldn't be there, but I think this prohibition is a bit too strong. So I really took that feedback in, and also, of course, the comments that were put forward by the Minister for Environment. So I don't suggest that this amendment will resolve all of the objections that the Environment Minister has to this proposition, but I think it definitely goes some way to alleviating some of the concerns that were presented in that order paper. The first thing I want to do before I get into the body of the argument is just to really acknowledge the work that the petitioners have put into this. It's no small feat to go around Jersey collecting physical signatures for a paper petition because they need to have multiple sheets, they need to get around the island and get signatures, and there's an engagement process that happens which isn't the same as when we have an online petition. Online petitions I think are really useful. I certainly would defend their use and continuation, but paper petitions give an opportunity really for a different kind of conversation, a different level of engagement to happen, and there's a level of onerousness to that, and so I do want to recognise that, as well as the 801 official signatures that were put on the petition. There were some signatures I think that had to be discounted because they weren't complete, the address may not have included a postcode, etc. So that's the first thing to say, and that paper petitions are a useful tool. They don't necessarily happen that frequently, but it also allows for petitioners to engage with a states member. That's what they've done. This is not something which is especially pertinent at the moment to St Brelard. It's not a constituency issue, but it is very much an island-wide matter, and it has the potential, of course, to affect any parish in any part of the island in future, any part of the island which may have agricultural land. So I think it is important for all of us. And the argument really goes like this. Certainly for my part, I'm not anti-solar. I would love to see more renewable energy in Jersey. I hope that one day we finally get a wind farm off the ground, if that's still economically viable, and essentially if the project still works. And I would want to see that work for the benefit of the island, but I think the same arguments can be made for solar. But there is a difference here, of course, because in the same way that we wouldn't necessarily support an on-land solar farm in Jersey, and I think even the most pro-wind, sorry, did I say solar? I meant wind farm. In Jersey, even the most pro-wind farm people wouldn't want to see the whole of the northern parishes or large parts of St Martin, St Mary, St Wan's filled with big wind turbines. I don't think anyone would. But I think there's a comparison to be made with solar. When we start putting solar panels extensively on green fields, or brown fields rather, which can be used to grow green products, there's a problem there, because actually there's a tension between what else could be grown on those fields, whether it's potatoes, whether it is more diverse crops, because there are other places where solar panels can be put. And for my part, and certainly for the part of the petitioners and many people I speak to, who have been decrying the fact that Jersey is so far behind, when they travel to other places, whether it's the north of England or around the world, they'll see that solar is proliferating, and it's, in some cases, I admit, it is being put on fields, but they're often happening in countries which are much larger. I've made the point that Jersey isn't China. We don't have vast deserts where we can roll out huge solar farms. But we do have the sun, of course, so we have to be very selective about where we put it. Old farmers knew about the potential of the hillsides for capturing the power of the sun. That's why the coaties were not covered with solar panels. They didn't exist, of course, but they were covered with nature's solar panels in terms of the plants, the potatoes that grew very well on the coaties to capture the early sun even in winter before spring, so that the potatoes could get onto the markets. And I know arguments will be made about economies of scale, that it is cheaper to fill a field with solar panels than it is to put them on the roofs of buildings. But ultimately, I think there is less detriment to the environment if they're going in the built environment rather than on those green fields, the brown fields, where the tension does not exist, sir. So that's essentially my argument. And I will look to others who are going to make perhaps introduce kilowatt-hour prices. There will no doubt be members who are doing that. There might be a former Environment Minister who wants to speak, as well as a current one, on this issue. And I will just add that I think there's a tension there, which I haven't put in the report, about Jersey Electricity. There's a double-edged sword with Jersey Electricity on the one hand, because they're the monopoly provider of our electrical services. They bring electricity to the island from France. We know that energy is already green. Ostensibly, it's green in the sense that it's low carbon. I mean, there are issues, of course, with nuclear. But it's low carbon energy. It's cheap energy already. But there's an issue in the sense that they've cornered the market. And one of the advantages I see with renewables is, and the exciting area of renewables for me, as a layperson, as a potential user in the future, is that they have a disruptive function. You can put micro renewables on your own property. You can fill your roof if it's suitable, and I think you can do it anyway. It's a question of efficiency. With solar panels, you can probably put a small wind turbine up, and it can certainly heat your water and provide some for a battery. And we know that battery capacities are getting bigger. And so there's a potential there. If you combine that with great insulation, because it's not an either-or, and I was pleased earlier, I think in the last sitting, that during question time, the Minister did refer to the fact that we need to, insulate homes in Jersey. So irrespective of whether one's using oil, electricity, gas to heat a property, the first thing to make sure is that you've got insulation. And that's, I think, a challenge for government to make sure that insulation grants are either maintained or increased in the future. Because there are big win-wins there. If we can reduce the amount of energy that families in Jersey need to use in the first place, that's going to be good for the environment, but it's actually great for their pockets in a cost of living crisis. So I think those are the main arguments that I wanted to make. I will listen attentively. I do hope that with this amendment being in place, that the amendment, I remind members, is that there's a presumption against solar ground mounts on agricultural land, where there can be a good case made for solar panels to go in fields, and where it can be truly shown that the value of the agricultural land is very poor quality, I think then there will be cases made on a case-by-case basis. But I think there is at least some anecdotal evidence that there isn't proper scrutiny and measurement in terms of what constitutes poor agricultural land, and that actually there needs to be, I think, greater thought going into that, rather than just a farmer who's going to get more money, or the owner of the farmland saying, this is really poor land, and I happen to get maybe 3 or 4 times more rent for putting solar panels on it, sir. So I do make the proposition, and I welcome comments from members.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the proposition seconded? Yes. Deputy Coles, you indicated a wish to speak on the proposition.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So I rise first off to congratulate Deputy Tadeo on bringing this proposition, because obviously this has come through a petition, a paper petition, and it's a very good way for members of the public to engage. It still seems, it still does hold more weight than our online petition system, sir. So I think more members of the public should absolutely be encouraged to engage with States members in this method. Because here we are debating a proposition, so well done to the Deputy for that. Also, I'd like to point out this is another good way to actually represent a lobby group publicly, so I will stand on my thing from earlier. So I know a lot of members think that with us and Reform Jersey we're tied to have to vote all the same way, but this is another good example of where we're not, and we have free votes on things which aren't within our manifesto. So for me, sir, I'm struggling to support all parts of this proposition, even as amended. And I'll start with part A, with the presumption against, because agricultural land already exists within the green zone, which within the island plan is already got a presumption against development. So I feel that adding an additional reason to presume against developing on a greenfield site tips the balance within the island plan, because we know there's many policies within that plan, and every one of them has competing weight, and as decision makers within the planning committee we have to sometimes look at these and try and balance whether it's the right or wrong. I've seen 3 solar farms come to planning committee. The first one in St Clement's, the second one on Sorrel, and the third one was in St Mary's. I approved 2 out of the 3, but I turned down the one in Sorrel because I thought it was very visually dominant, bringing a very heavily industrialised look in an area that was very untouched and also in the Coastal National Park. That one still did get permission from the committee because 3 other members of that committee didn't agree with me, so that's how democracy works. And so I feel that this presumption against is already present and so doesn't actually need to be added. But I also wouldn't have agreed with it when it was prohibition because I am, as a representative of St Helier South, sir, I live in an area where we can't survive on solar on our roofs. We have a lot of highly dense buildings through flats and apartments. In fact, I was at and I do like going to consultations with the public on planning applications, especially when they're in the area and you have a resident who is very well informed about solar energy. Because there was one development, she looked at the roofscape, she counted the number of panels, went to the architect and said, so you're only powering the lights in the lift with this installation because we're going to have nothing else for anything else when you use the kilowatt hours that these produce. And the architect was staggered and went, yeah, but probably not even the lift, if we're honest. You might get the cleaner be able to hoover the stairs, but it will just be the lights in the common areas that will be powering with the solar panels. Because the amount of space that you need to actually provide significant energy through solar panels has to be quite long and broad. There was, during the presentation, sir, that the Deputy Tadier referred to by the bringers of the petition, highlighted the limited amount of percentage of the island's energy these solar panels will generate. So I always feel it's better to try and play your part in everything. The world is struggling with climate change and greenhouse gases, and everybody needs to contribute their part. We have said as an island that we're pausing our wind power at the moment because the market isn't right to develop it. But the JEC is quite comfortable knowing that if they can generate 5% of our energy needs on island, that is absolutely a plus for us. So I might be able to support Part B, because considering the strength protections for loss of agricultural land to solar ground mounts, I think there is something in that. I'm not necessarily overly convinced, because there's sometimes a lack of information provided by developers in all sorts of areas around demolition and rebuild, why it's required. But I feel when we get presented with solar panels, we don't know about soil quality, or at least I don't. I mean, I've got a couple of former farmers or people who've spent their lives in the countryside, and they talk about the soil around me, and I say, it looks brown. They know what it's doing. They say it's good agriculture, it's good this, it's good for that. I don't know. But what I do know, sir, is that when you put something on a field for 40 years so a plough won't get run through it, it will lock in carbon. All the grass that grows around it, or the clover if they're doing it for the sheep farming, or even just planting around the edges, when it's not ploughed, it doesn't release carbon back into our atmosphere. So 40 years of carbon sink also sounds good to me. So I'm kind of on balance on that. When I even look at Part C as originally presented, I mean, so there was a feel-good news article with the Constable from St John's, with Chris Ambler from the JEC, as they have started work putting on solar panels onto States of Jersey-owned buildings. That work is already underway, so why do we need to support something that is already underway? So I'm definitely against A. C feels like it doesn't matter to me because it's underway. I probably could be convinced for B, so that's the only part that I'm really listening for, sir. So, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition as amended? Conatable Greville.
Thank you, sir. Modern farming has changed quite a bit in the last 10 years. And the largest Jersey Royal producer in the island has reduced their area quite considerably in the last few years. And there's many reasons for that. One of them is they're more into rotating crops. They're producing other things from them, haylage, silage. They're grazing those fields to encourage many different things, but mostly it's about rotation, sir. Because if you monocrop for too many years, something increases in the soil which will actually stop potato production altogether, and that is PCN, potato cyst nematode, eelworm. And my polytunnels were monocropped for about 20 years. And I was told by a soil analysis technician that my soil had more eelworm in it than soil. And so I had to stop producing potatoes because they simply wouldn't grow. And so what I'm trying to say, sir, is that I've also insisted that whenever we get a planning application through for a solar mount on a field, that we see the PCN analysis, because time will cure that problem. If you don't grow potatoes for about 10 years, the problem will lessen and indeed disappear eventually. The cysts that they go into are very tough. So that is one thing to think about when it comes to agricultural land being used for solar farms. You do actually give them a break away from potato production. The next point I raised was when I asked a technician within that company who actually managed their fields, I said, what about the coatees, sir? Are they still profitable? And he said, we're within about half a dozen years or so of those fields becoming too labour intensive and therefore losing their profitability. And all of those, as we all know, as the proposer has already said, face into the morning sun, into the sun, that is their point. And when it comes to solar mounts, they wouldn't need such an infrastructure because they're already facing in the right direction. But we're a little ways off from that point. I certainly wouldn't want to see them at, let's say, for example, the Gorey coatees. They're far too public. But there are many coatees in the island, sir, that are not visible and they're not seen from the road. So they could be used for this purpose. We've also seen, one thing I would like to encourage, brownfield sites for solar mounts. And that is greenhouse sites that are all over the island in small or large pockets. Those sites are usually open to the elements, open to the light, that is winter light, certainly, and be more suitable for solar-mounted applications because they will also have large electronic cables going to them for their boiler house and their heating systems, so you won't have to bring those in. A lot of greenhouse sites around the island are not suitable for domestic applications because you'd have to bring all the services in for them. But they've already got the electrical cabling required for a solar mount. So that's one thought I had the other day. I was also very pleased to be able to go to the prison at La Moy. Many new buildings have been built up there, sir, and not one of them had a solar panel on it. So I'm very pleased that the new initiative from the DFI Minister and Chris Ambler from the JC is looking at all the states buildings that we have around the island, because we really do have some areas that could be used for this purpose. But I will be supporting this.
Thank you, Colonel Toll. The Minister for Environment.
Thank you, sir. Sir, it's clear that the development and location of energy generating infrastructure is a matter of significant public interest, and I want to start by thanking the Deputy for his efforts to represent the petitioners, the very many petitioners who are clearly concerned by this matter, and for bringing the subject for debate in the Assembly today. However, whilst those intentions are entirely understandable, I would want to put the view that this approach, whether proposing an outright prohibition or as now the presumption against any form of development, is not the right way to address this matter, particularly when it attempts to sit outside our established statutory plan-making framework. The way we review and adopt the island plan is set out in law, as we all know. That process exists for a good reason. It provides a transparent, democratic and evidence-based method for determining land use policy. If we start to predetermine parts of a future island plan before that process has even begun, we risk undermining the integrity of the whole system. Perhaps more significantly, we cannot bind a future minister, or indeed bind this Assembly itself, to decisions made outside of the lawful plan-making framework. Alongside this, our existing planning system, involving the submission of planning applications that can be assessed against the current island plan, Bridging Island Plan, already enables us to consider individual proposals on their specific individual sites. This is an essential safeguard. It means that we can already properly consider the potential benefits that any proposal for a solar array may bring, weighing these against the agricultural value of the land, the site's characteristics, the potential environmental effects, including the impacts on neighbours and the arrangements proposed for long-term management, decommissioning and land restoration. And Deputy Coles has mentioned the balancing of policies and how you have to balance to reach a determination. So the current Bridging Island Plan already provides a balanced and robust set of policies for assessing proposals for terrestrial solar developments. Policy U12, which deals with utilities infrastructure facilities, requires developers to show that where proposals fall outside of the built-up area, no reasonable alternative sites are available. Countryside locations are only supported when genuinely necessary. Policy ME6 allows for large-scale renewable energy projects, but only where the benefits clearly outweigh any environmental or agricultural harm. This policy also expresses a clear preference for the use of former greenhouse sites, it's already been mentioned, to accommodate solar arrays, and it requires time-limited permissions and proper land restoration. So these policies don't stand alone. They sit alongside others designed to protect our most productive agricultural land and to support appropriate rural diversification. I would refer members to the framing of the existing policy that we already have in the current Bridging Island Plan to protect agricultural land. That policy, policy ERE1, is called Protection of Agricultural Land, and it states that in its first line, and I quote, "The development or loss of agricultural land will not be supported unless in exceptional circumstances." And the policy then goes on to set out a series of strict tests against which proposals for alternative uses of agricultural land might be assessed. On this basis, I would suggest that there is already a presumption against the use of agricultural land for non-agricultural purposes, which would include the development of solar arrays. Taken together, all the relevant policies that already exist within the current island plan ensure that decisions are made only after all of the relevant considerations, including the effect of development on agricultural land, and they're all properly considered before a balanced planning decision is reached. Excuse me. So there's also a need for us to acknowledge the wider strategic picture here, I think. This Assembly has previously endorsed the Carbon Neutral Roadmap, which guides how we approach the island's current and future energy supply. The roadmap stresses the need to balance affordability, energy security, and environmental sustainability, the so-called energy trilemma. Solar energy can absolutely make a positive contribution to that balance, and especially so at this time, and given the challenges around energy prices in the last few weeks. So it's clear that the vast uncertainty around the Iran war is pushing up energy prices around the world. Gas and oil are particularly affected, but electricity is not immune. Regardless of whether it comes from a nuclear source not far away, or the Lens barrage not 40 miles south of us, or the fact that a percentage of the purchase price has already been hedged, the price of electricity will be adversely affected if all other energy sources become more expensive. However, the cost of one source of power that will not be changed is locally produced solar. Regardless of the fact that it would provide a reasonable percentage of security of supply, especially if combined with battery storage, it will provide electricity at a constant price, unaffected by external pressures. We need to think hard about the trilemma. Solar is affordable, it provides energy security, and it is sustainable. Yes, sir, the aesthetics of looking at solar arrays in our countryside is not what we might wish for in certain areas, but there is always a balance to be struck. The work that we have committed to, producing an energy strategy by the end of this year, will focus on the energy trilemma and consider how we best strike that balance. So if we preempt these various work streams and restrict our options now by prohibiting or presuming against nuclear energy infrastructure on agricultural land, we risk constraining future energy planning and potentially higher energy prices in ways that may not serve the island well. So it is for these reasons that I don't consider it appropriate for this Assembly to ask the next Environment Minister to determine any planning framework, policy framework, whether that be a blanket prohibition or now a presumption against solar arrays on agricultural land in the next island plan. At this time, which in my view is not the right time, determining a position on this matter now would not be correct. We'd be cutting across established processes designed specifically to weigh these questions in a fair, evidence-based and transparent way. Instead, sir, I would suggest that members should have confidence in the legal framework that we already have, one that allows both strategic policy and individual applications to be assessed rigorously and determined democratically. I would urge members to reject this proposition and to allow future decisions to be made through the proper established processes that safeguard both the integrity of our planning system and look after the best long-term interests of the island. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Minister.
So would the Minister give way to clarify one matter?
Minister, do you give way?
I wonder if the Minister could elucidate what his policy is in relation to the application of the Agricultural Land Control of Sales and Leases law in relation to solar panels.
Could I ask the Deputy if he could elaborate a little bit further on that, sir? I know I may answer in as much as any agreement with a developer to put solar on fields has to come with a full contract which involves not only the lifetime of the lease but also the restoration of the agricultural land at the end of that lease, if that helps.
It doesn't help, sir, but I will address it later on.
Thank you. Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. I'm speaking slightly earlier than I expected. As members may guess, I'm also preparing for my one that has come a little sooner than expected, but I won't shuffle it down the order paper for members' benefit. They can support me instead with a quick speech. But on this topic, sir, I've been thinking long and hard about this. And I'll talk about the amendment that Deputy Tadier brought that I fear slightly might have come from some conversations I was party to as well. It's fair to say I don't instinctively like solar panels filling entire fields. I'm getting some support already. It's a great start. I'm a field owner on the same road as the St Clement Array. And I don't like looking eastward as I go down Rue Laurent and I see the fields on Rue de Moulin-Avon covered with what is ultimately glass raised above the ground. I would say, however, a surprise to me when I was working in the field just a couple of weeks ago was to hear the sheep being farmed below it from my field. I'm close enough that I could hear them bleating and baaing. And the sound of the countryside was actually, it was a joy to be there and actually to hear that. Those who know the land around where we've got our fields hasn't often had farming of livestock. And it was quite a joy to hear. So I say that as a moment of surprise from something I instinctively don't like looking at. And I don't like looking at it because it just doesn't look nice. And I think that's a reasonable feeling. We all have an expectation as to what the countryside looks like. But turning to the proposition as now amended with 3 parts, I know I raised, for a start, that a prohibition is a rather draconian and kind of absolutist way of approaching policy. And I highlighted, albeit still to challenges by some in the briefing that I was party to, that there are clear reasons why I think actually solar on agricultural land may well be fine. Because what the proposition wasn't about was about filling entire fields. It was about solar on agricultural land. And there are many farmers who may wish to boost their resilience by having solar on unproductive parts of small fields or down tracks that they can't use. We may have vineyards on the island who wish to use areas next to it to help with their cooling infrastructure, for example. All reasonable uses. And indeed, and I will talk about smallholders later, we may have those with market gardens who genuinely have a belief and would like to test or evidence that shaded crop growth may well be something suitable for them and would actually lower the costs of operation on their site. So I think a prohibition was wrong. But I did mention that I think if one has discomfort and just doesn't want a general favour for them, that the wording may well be a presumption against. But I have been thinking about what a presumption against really means. And it means that we assume that on balance something shouldn't happen except really where the evidence significantly outweighs the cons. And what are the benefits and what are the cons in the case of solar on fields? And I think the current policy context was made clear by the Minister for Environment. The clear one is it just doesn't look nice. As I say, people don't like the feeling of going down around our rural lanes and seeing planks of glass hovering above fields. The other one that has been made as a key case by some, and I suggest will be coming up by others later, is that it's a competition to agriculture and that we are losing valuable fields to agriculture in replacement of solar. The benefit on the other side we've heard may well be that should the numbers work out that this is a sufficient and valuable hedge against market volatility, that in particular in summer, our resilience on our grid is greatly improved by having a significant amount of the peak load in double-digit percentages provided by solar, and ultimately that it could be in the economic interest for money for JEC, either for their customers or for infrastructure. That's a case we're being provided, notwithstanding the heads being shaken. But I do want to turn to the agricultural one to give a perspective, because some voices have said, well, these fields are being lost to the potato industry. And the Farmers Union, I'm sure, who are listening, will say that there's a varying quality of set of fields. And that actually the amount of land under potato cultivation has been decreasing year on year. The fact is there are many fields out there that are not being farmed for anything, fields that are not marginal and not suboptimal for farming, and our fallow land is increasing, and actually the rigour in which we capture that data, which is the Agricultural Returns Law, I think 1947, is nowhere near complete at the moment. And I know a lot of fields, I see the Minister for Environment nodding, that we are missing the data to understand the current land use and agricultural cultivation with the powers we have. And to those who say it should be used, the Connétable of Grouville has said, well, what for? Is potato the right crop for everywhere? That comes down to the quality of the agricultural land and its suitability. And that's where I have, and I know for certain, sir, I will support Part B of this amendment, which is about reframing the evidence base to lose agricultural land from certain uses. But to those who say that, for a start, sheep farming is not agriculture, whether we want it to be or not, it's defined in law, sir, as a form of agriculture under the 1974 law and under, I think maybe even the 1964 Protection of Agricultural Land Law. There's plenty of laws that define what agriculture is, and grazing of livestock is one of them. There aren't many people to go out there and farm. So I would say to those who see and wish for an agricultural community and a resurgence in the island, they have their parts to play. There are reasons why so many families left the agricultural industry on this island, but for those who want to see a reverse, it is also their job and incumbent on them to support it, however that may be. For those who are keen, it may be to start a small holding. For those with expertise in law, it could be donating time to farmers to ensure that they can be sustainable. It is not simple enough for those to say that they want to see farming exist on the island and yet not play a part in the culture and the requirements to keep that going. So, agriculture is a complex one. The finances are a complex one, and the looks are as well. But merely saying that there should be a presumption against is tricky, because we need to agree why. Is it because we're losing good land? Is it because the risks to our countryside are too high? And that's where Part B is specific as to one reason to have a higher threshold. We really could have split this out as well and said the protection for the countryside character, currently largely done under policy NE3, should be higher for harm to the countryside. And in doing so, we would catch other harms to landscape character, such as developments that really damage the countryside. But many would say our policies are there to be judged by the decision maker and are there already. Quickly turning to the economics, I followed up with the Jersey Electricity Company and spoke to them about this. And what I would say, and I have great sympathy for the petitioners, and I feel in the same place, is the economic case is not being made easy for members to make an informed decision today on this. We're being told that this is a valuable hedge, that notwithstanding it would be 5% in their case and their aspirational development, it is meaningful. But we are not being given the impact on the bottom line for consumers. The answer will be that the energy markets are incredibly volatile. There is no way to predict. But we can ask, what does it look like today? Is a solar generated on island the same price as a solar imported? And then we would be able to say, do we want to hedge against that baseline in a world of uncertainty? And I think most islanders do want some level of hedging against an uncertain time where energy could go up. The question is, are members being given the information on that? So I struggle with the first part, partly on the procedural lines that the Minister has said. We should follow the statutory process for reviewing the island plan. I absolutely support, though, giving him the steer to ensure that the evidence base for good agricultural land assessment is there. And I urge those who want to come forward with schemes like this to provide a far greater and compelling case to those who are, especially the decision makers, like us in the planning committee, to weigh up those pros and cons. It has to include the impact to consumers, the energy sovereignty and the power that has for the island. And I will be honest, sir, whilst the committee have approved 3 sites so far, regardless of this, we will have an extant plan. Nonetheless, that will be followed. The quality of case being presented has to be higher, and members should be trusted with the information in confidence where it needs to be, and as much as possible educating the public as well as to the trade-off. And maybe some would say, actually, I'm willing to accept that trade. So it is challenging. I would mention briefly, whilst I've got a chance, it will probably be my last chance to mention it in this assembly, on the control of the Agricultural Land Control and Sale and Leases Law, that is by far a perfect law being operated at the moment. And it isn't actually the renting of land to those with a dual agricultural use for solar that is raised. It is the fact that it continues not to be enforced in other areas. The farmers who will be farming the land that the petitioners want are losing out on land not to solar, but often to those buying land around their own domestic curtilage. I went to a meeting with smallholders to join them like for like in essence, and I asked when I met, how's it going with your purchase? He was looking to buy a 1 verge parcel of land, and he said, you wouldn't believe it, after half a year of trying to buy this one, it got snapped up by the neighbour next to it for double I could offer. That neighbour has no holding, that neighbour has no right to farm it, they're not bona fide, they have not submitted the paperwork. So when we ask what the presumption is, we have to ask, what is the presumption for in this island? Is it for continued agriculture? Is it for the protection of the character of the area? And I would urge members caution. I won't say how they should vote on the first part, on Part A, but I think members should all support a renewed support for new farmers and the protection of land. And so Part B, I think, can be supported, and Part C, I think, sounds uncontentious. So with that, I'll finish and thank members.
Thank you, Deputy Curtis. Does any other member wish to speak? Deputy Balash.
So I agree with Deputy Curtis, I must say, about the environmental aspects of solar farms, because I don't think that they are very attractive or enhance the countryside in any way. Having said that, it may be that there are pieces of land where solar farms could be introduced without any detriment to the environment. I'm neutral on that, and in particular I think of derelict glass houses where the land has been unused for years, sometimes decades, where it might be possible for
a sensible policy to allow for the construction of solar farms in those areas. But this is not just a planning matter. It's also an agricultural matter. And it concerns the use of agricultural land, which is protected under the Agricultural Land Control of Sales and Leases Law of 1974. The purpose of that law is to preserve agricultural land for agricultural use in very broad terms. And it seems to me as clear as a bell that putting solar farms on agricultural land is not preserving the land for agricultural use. But I think it's worth looking at the law itself, because the law provides that no person shall enter a contract for the sale or transfer of any agricultural land without the consent of the minister being the Minister of the Environment. And paragraph 2 of Article 2 goes on to say that the minister, it says two things. The minister may refuse consent or grant consent, either unconditionally or subject to conditions. And then importantly it says, and in deciding whether or not to grant consent or otherwise, the minister shall have particular regard to the desirability of reserving agricultural land for the use of bona fide inhabitants of Jersey engaged wholly or mainly in work of an agricultural or horticultural nature in Jersey. Well, it seems to me that there is no argument that the Jersey Electricity Company is not such a person. The Jersey Electricity Company is not engaged wholly or mainly in work of an agricultural or horticultural nature. And so the presumption should be that consent should not be granted under that particular provision. But the second point that is made in Article 2.2 is that and the minister shall have regard to the desirability of reserving and so on. And the second thing, and ensuring that any lease of agricultural land is on terms that encourage the continued cultivation of land in accordance with the principles of good husbandry. Now that might give a slight chink for the farmer who wishes to let land to the JEC to be able to escape the previous requirement. Because if the owner of the land can set terms on the lease that encourage the continued cultivation of the land in accordance with the principles of good husbandry, he is home and dry. But I must confess that allowing sheep safely to graze under solar panels does not seem to me to be cultivation of the land in accordance with the principles of good husbandry. It just doesn't seem to ring true. And therefore, the 1974 law creates what is tantamount to an insuperable object to the lease of land to the JEC, lease of agricultural land to the JEC for the use of solar panels. And this is why I wanted the minister to address his policy under the 1974 law. And in a sense, I'm sorry I didn't press the matter because I've rather lost the opportunity to do that as the minister has spoken. But it does seem to me, because I've heard no rationale for the granting of consent under the 1974 law, that it's difficult to put together reasons which would stand up in a court of law. And if a neighbour or somebody else entitled to appeal against the grant of consent under the 1974 law were to bring an action for judicial review, it seems to me that there is at least a strong arguable case that the appellant would be able to succeed. Paragraph A seems to me to be able to be read in two respects. I understand the Minister's point in relation to the island plan, and I think I would probably accept that. But it seems to me that paragraph A can be read in the context of the Minister's duties under the 1974 law. There should be a presumption against solar ground mounts on agricultural land, could equally be read as a mandate in relation to the exercise of discretion under the 1974 law. And so far as paragraph B and C are concerned, it seems to me that those are merely requests to the Minister, and I don't see any reason why there should be a refusal to consider those things.
Thank you, Deputy. I think Deputy Alex Curtis indicated a question first.
May I ask a question of the Attorney General just to clarify some elements of Deputy Balash's speech, again just to inform members. To the AG, the Deputy Balash referenced the 1974 law and raised concerns that sheep grazing would not be considered good husbandry. And I understand Article 1 of the Control of Sale and Leases Law 1974 defines agricultural land, means land including land under glass, used or capable of being used for any purpose of agriculture or horticulture, and stops there. But the earlier law that is still in force regarding its protection, the protection of agricultural land, Jersey Law 1964, defines agriculture as including horticulture, fruit growing, seed growing, dairy farming, the breeding and keeping of livestock, the use of land as grazing land, meadowland, market gardens, and nursery grounds, and references to agricultural land shall be construed accordingly. My question is, in the absence of a definition in the Agricultural Land Control and Sale and Leases Law, would it be reasonable to consider the definition in Article 1 of the 1964 law as defining agriculture and agricultural land being construed accordingly?
Deputy Ronald, did you have a question as well, or is it the same question? Mr. Attorney, do you wish to have some time to consider that?
No, I'm confident that agriculture includes the gamut of farming operations, which includes dairy farming and sheep farming. And I don't take the word cultivate in Article 2 of the 1974 law to restrict the meaning for the purposes of that law to ploughing or cutting grass or growing trees. Agriculture plainly includes pastoral farming. So I don't see it limited in that way at all.
Thank you.
So I have a question.
Deputy Attorney.
Thank you, sir. For the Attorney General, of course. The Attorney General was kind enough to answer a written question 47 in February of this year. In the question, he stated that he quoted from the 1974 law that says the Minister shall have particular regard to the desirability of reserving agricultural land for the use of bona fide inhabitants and for agricultural purposes. That's the law. And he said that where the statute uses language like shall have particular regard, it means that a factor is to be given importance and weight, and it's not just a run-of-the-mill consideration. And he said that thus underlining the inherent purpose of the 1974 law, which is to preserve a land bank available in Jersey for farmers and its cultivation. Could the Attorney General state what kind of tests would be given if a judicial review were to arise around whether or not the Minister had actually given sufficient particular regard to that decision?
Mr. Attorney?
Well, I think the answer may lie in the last paragraph of the written answer that we gave, which was that the dual use of agricultural land following the installation of solar panels is not necessarily inconsistent or incompatible with the 1974 law, but will depend on the circumstances. If the nature of the solar installation is such that no use can be made of the land other than solar farming, then it would be very difficult in those circumstances to suggest that the minister had made a decision to permit that in accordance with the requirements of Article 2 of the 1974 law. It might be, though, far more nuanced than that if the design enables the land to be used not only for solar farming, but for traditional agriculture, grazing of animals, probably growing of plants. That would be a different situation. And a court, if that were judicially reviewed, would be asking itself whether a decision of that sort was lawful within the meaning of the 1974 law, was reasonable, and had been procedurally regularly made. So I don't necessarily agree with Deputy Balash's view that it would be, as it were, an open and shut case. I think it would be perfectly arguable that where both uses are possible on the land, the minister might be on firmer ground if he were judicially reviewed.
Another question, Deputy Tadier.
Yes, then it relates to the part which says that that fields should be used wholly or mainly for agricultural or horticultural nature in Jersey. Does the Attorney General agree that where a whole field is given over to a solar array, that it's difficult for it then to be argued that the field is being used wholly or mainly for agricultural purposes in any kind, and that the main purpose of that is for electricity generation, and that actually at best an ancillary use, not a whole or main one, is for agriculture if it's being used at all?
No, I don't agree with that. I think each case would turn on its own facts as to what was meant by mainly in the particular circumstances of the case. If a user, a dual user, permitted both substantial agricultural use and solar farming, there would be a perfectly respectable argument that that was mainly for agricultural use, but at the same time coexisting beside a different use. As I say, each case would turn on its own facts.
So I wonder if the Attorney General could elaborate further. I accept each case would turn on its own facts. What does he think those facts might be that would turn it one way or the other? Would it be income? Would it be the income generated, the viability of the use?
Mr. Attorney.
No, the focus would be on the use of the land for agriculture and whether or not it was still capable of being used mainly for agriculture, notwithstanding that there was a coexisting use.
And so this will probably be the last question, but could it be a deferred use? Could it be argued that where a field is not being used for any agricultural purposes, there are no sheep, for example, there are no mushrooms growing under, certainly not being cultivated, that it is still being preserved because in 40 years' time the field will still be able to be used for agriculture? Is that a stretch or is that a fact?
Attorney.
Well, the word of the statute is the minister shall have particular regard to the desirability of reserving agricultural land for the use of bona fide inhabitants of Jersey. I, thinking off the top of my head, would consider that reserving agricultural land means that in its present state it is reserved so that it is capable of having an agricultural use.
Thank you. So, Deputy Rod Ward, you indicated a wish to speak.
Thank you, sir. I've forgotten what I was going to say now. I actually have a quick question for the Attorney General before I start. That's peer pressure, sir, peer pressure. The first part I says that presumption...
Is this a legal question?
I think so. I'm not legally trained, so I'm entirely sure. So the first part says presumption against solar ground mounts on agricultural land. And because I asked the Attorney General, you've had questions on it seems, on the amount of solar panels there are in terms of the judgment by the Minister. If the presumption is against solar ground mounts, does that mean any at all? Because I think this is a key point legally. i.e. if we presume against, you cannot put a single solar panel on that field for any use, or is it a certain amount of solar panels?
I think that's for the proposer to say what the proposition means, not for me.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, so let's speak. So I'll do this in reverse order, like Eurovision. So Part C, there is no problem with at all. Indeed, sir, I will say there is a point to be made about Part C, which is more than just Jersey-owned buildings. We have been talking, the Education Department with the Infrastructure Minister and JEC, to talk about the use of car parks in our schools. The Lockyer, Grainville, Hope Valley, Le Kennevet have huge spaces that are open to the sunlight every day. People park their cars there, and in the summer they go back to a boiling hot car, fill their windows full of silvery things to keep them cool. And if you go through Europe, you see solar panels in car parks everywhere. There is also infrastructure nearby in terms of electrical supply, which makes that absolutely possible. I personally would like to see that type of solar array, which I think is simple, effective, and educationally very useful, because young people can see what's being generated. Very good teaching tool as well. I think I would like to see those areas used first. And I think we could increase our solar arrays in those types of areas first before we use fields. So I think there is a lot of work to be done. And this goes to the point made by the Constable of Grouville. Very interesting. And I have to say, so I found this a very interesting debate. Not just the detailed sort of points. And I was very pleased to follow Deputy Alex Curtis and Deputy Balash. I haven't said that very often, but I'm very pleased to have. I actually I do like a bit of precision, sir. And that precision about the 1974 law does seem to be very important in this, because it seems to me that Part A may already exist. But I'll come back to that at the end. But so I think Part C is important, and I've seen no problem with it. Part B, to consider strengthening protections for loss of agricultural land to solar ground mounts. I see no problem with that, because that's about considering that protection. If we get to a stage on this island, sir, and I think this does need to be considered, that farming becomes untenable because of the land itself, then you're going to need to use it for somewhere else. I hope that doesn't happen, because I think we need food security as much as anything else. I know we'll never have full food security, but growing on this island is not only traditional and part of its culture, but I think it's something that needs to be maintained. But we have to work on maintaining that type of land. So I see no problem at all with Part B. I was very interested in the comments made by the Minister as well, and Deputy Alex Curtis, about hedging against uncertainty. And I know there are some arguments to say, well, if we increase solar panels on buildings, actually the price of our electricity will go up, because of, there are arguments about that. I'm not sure I agree with them myself. But I think that increasing of our renewables on this island, in order to try and increase that sort of certainty of price, because we can provide our own, is a very important feature for the future of this island. I think it's absolutely one way that we have to go. So I was very interested in that point, and I think the Minister and the Deputy Alex Curtis got a very good point there. I will say, sir, that perhaps I'm an outlier on this, but sometimes you know, we go to different places and you see large wind turbines and you see fields of solar panels, and I actually look at them and think, wow, isn't that great? We're not burning fossil fuels. You know, all of those things are working using unique science, and we're not burning fossil fuels and pumping stuff into the atmosphere. So they have an intrinsic beauty to them, which I think perhaps we need to reevaluate, but perhaps that's just me. So I will support B and C. I'm not sure about A, and I'm not sure because I think fields can be protected if we get B and C right, if we get our priorities right in terms of using our buildings, using our spaces, as I've mentioned. And I really would encourage the next Assembly, whoever is Infrastructure Minister, Education Minister, to continue those discussions with the JEC about using those very large spaces for solar arrays, because there is a huge utility available there that it's just simply not being used. And I think we should be using those first. But there's presumption against solar ground mounts. I think we need to be very careful, and I would like the bring of the proposition to suggest whether that means any solar mounts at all, because if, as was mentioned, if you want to put a couple of solar panels to help you with cooling or perhaps pumping of water, I don't know, or anything else, watering itself, then I think we have to be careful as to what we agree here and the unintended consequences. So just some clarity on that would be very good. Other than that, B and C are fine, and C, genuinely, sir, for once, I'm not entirely convinced. I'm a bit, dare I say, sheepish about it. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to make a speech mainly on the theme of resilience, because to me that's the biggest issue raised by the proposition. But before that, I want to address the amendment, and particularly Part A, which changes the proposition from a prohibition to a presumption against. And I would argue...
Sorry, Deputy, can I just check that we are quorate? So we are not quite currently quorate.
Happens often.
Very well, please continue.
Yes, the presumption against. In my view, sir, a planning presumption against is, to all intents and purposes, the same as a ban. It does not meaningfully change the original proposition, and I'll explain why. The planning system is already providing significant headwinds. The Cabinet Office report on the St Mary application raised such significant issues, correctly in my view, that the application was withdrawn. Similarly, public opposition led to the withdrawal of the St Martin's site. Now, Jersey Electricity have devoted considerable resource to planning applications that have not gone through, even with the current, you might say, relatively benign planning policy framework. If there is a presumption against ground-mounted solar, then I cannot see JE or any other potential operator will feel there is much point in putting in the time, money and energy into such a high-risk activity. This proposition, as amended, will kill the ground-mounted solar industry stone dead. And that, of course, is the explicit intention of the proposition, which was built on a petition which had that intent. So neither the intent or the effect of the proposition has been changed by the amendment, albeit it is now worded in such a way that it sounds slightly less absolute. A moment to look at the bigger picture. I'm sorry, I can't help it, I'm just built this way. As we speak today, we are being reminded once again of the critical risks in relying on hydrocarbons for our energy supply. The price of fuel and gas are going up. The world is going to kick its addiction to fossil fuels, and in particular, Europe is going to kick its addiction somewhat sooner than much of the rest of the world, because it does not want to be dependent on Russian gas or Middle Eastern oil or even West Texas crude. That is why there is an energy transition, because Europe wants, in the case of Europe, it wants its own resilient energy supply. It is at least as much to do with global geopolitics as it is to do with climate change. But happily, the geopolitical and climate and economic arguments all reinforce each other. So, where do you get energy independence? How is Europe going to get it? Solar and wind, with a massively integrated grid and backup battery supply. Hopefully some nuclear as well, but that is expensive electricity compared to renewables. Wind is the leading renewable resource in Europe, but my word, solar is coming up fast. Installations are growing at an extraordinary rate. In Europe, installed capacity is increasing at around 25% a year. 65 gigawatts last year alone. To put that in perspective, Jersey's potential wind farm would be 1 gigawatt. Why is this relevant? Because it is easy to miss that solar has become the biggest success story in renewable energy because it is so cheap. In round terms, new solar is half the price of new gas-generated electricity, for example, whereas in 2018, the costs were roughly comparable. And that includes in Northern Europe, by the way. Another striking statistic, The cost of solar generation has fallen 97% since 2012. In my view, it's not unreasonable from that point of view that Jersey Electricity would like to take advantage of the extraordinary price move in favour of ground-mounted solar, and that we might all benefit a little bit from that. It is cheap electricity. Installations in Jersey will not be quite as cheaply produced as larger solar farms in Europe, but the price of solar panels has collapsed so much that JE farms will indeed be producing cheap electricity. The letter from Jersey Electricity that we received clearly lays out how this relates to these wider points to Jersey. So I would say the primary case for JE building solar farms is indeed not tackling climate change. Although I will say in parentheses that whilst it's true to say that Jersey solar farms don't reduce our carbon emissions, they do reduce global carbon emissions. Every watt of renewable energy produced in Jersey means we import less from France, and that surplus low-carbon French electricity will be exported elsewhere in Europe, where it will displace high-carbon electricity. I want to emphasise that is not the reason why JE would be wanting to put solar panels on fields, but it is important to note. The primary reason for ground-mounted solar in Jersey is resilience. The point has been made that JE's solar farms would only make a small contribution to JE's overall supply. It's tempting to see resilience as something quite absolute. You're either resilient or you're not. But we know that in reality, resilience is something you build brick by brick. JE's note explained the concept pretty clearly. They buy a certain amount of electricity from France each year. They are price takers in that relationship, and there is now pricing pressure. In this context, JE reducing their exposure to prices over which they have no control by putting in place domestic production at a fixed low price builds some resilience. It reduces the total cost of the electricity that JE buy over the course of a year. Same for those of us who have solar panels on our house. We have access to electricity at a fixed price. We still have basically the capital cost of installing spread over 30 years. We still depend on JE for most of our electricity, but however much JE increase their price, we have a partial hedge. The average cost of our electricity is lowered by the wedge of electricity that we control ourselves. With ground-mounted solar, JE are able to do the same. I want to talk about the supposed loss of agricultural land, and I'm very grateful to the Attorney General for clarifying pretty clearly that the question of agricultural land as defined in the law is a red herring in terms of the arguments here. I would say that I don't think the current situation is entirely satisfactory. There is not enough transparent rigour around the choice of sites. Of course, we should not in general be building solar farms on prime arable land. And I think one of the problems we have is that the planning system has not yet got its head around having access to independent advice, for example, on the quality of land, soil. But that is not a reason to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Deputy Tadia says in his report that his starting point is that, and I quote, Jersey fields should be kept for agriculture, and Deputy Balash made a similar point. But as we've seen, unequivocally, the use of sheep farming underneath solar panels is farming, it is agriculture. It's called agri-solar, and it is actually a growth area. It's an innovative new area. And in my book, that feels like something that we might want to generally encourage in Jersey. Farming in Jersey is highly reliant on potatoes. There are lots of new, interesting innovations coming forward. Anyone who goes to Regen will be very aware of the amount of energy around that, and agri-solar could play into that. I actually met the farmer involved in the St. Clement farm, and he is selling mutton and lamb to local restaurants. That's great. Not only does that increase resilience, it's also diversifying our agriculture. And it's also true that other options are available. Fruit trees have been mentioned, but there are other, as Deputy Alex Curtis said, things like some forms of market gardening and so on. So we have food production and energy produced from the same land. That is the ultimate resilience play. Energy and food from the same land. Diversification and resilience. And as has been mentioned, we also have to have in mind that there are fewer fields in potato production. There's been a conscious aim to concentrate production on the most productive fields, to reduce fertilizer and pesticide input, to better align production with the market so that we don't see dumping, and to maintain prices. There is a considerable amount of farmland that is no longer required for potatoes, and a considerable amount of farmland in Jersey that is not farmed currently. We would be mad to have a presumption against solar in a situation like this, where so many opportunities are presented. And remember, we're talking about a tiny proportion of farmland in total, even in the most ambitious version of JE's plans. The argument about other types of solar, Part C of the proposition, I have no problem with Part C. We should be using rooftop solar first. I don't see it as first, second, third, or anything. I think we should be doing both simultaneously. I don't see a hierarchy. Rooftop solar is great where it can be done efficiently. It's not as efficient as ground mounted in general, except in some limited circumstances. Many roofs are not well aligned or are partially shaded and so on, and that does reduce the cost competitiveness. I love the idea of school car parks being covered by solar panels, but not every car park could be. If people have mentioned along Victoria Avenue, you put solar panels along there and you say goodbye to your Battle of Flowers or any other seating that goes in those car parks. So yes, we absolutely should focus on rooftop solar, but ground mounted is bigger scale and more efficient. And in my world, those are good things. We should be doing both. It is not either or. So I don't think we should be building in a structural bias against grid solar on farmland because that is building in a bias against resilience. What on earth has it come to? As an island, we react to increasing insecurity in the world by turning our back on by far the cheapest form of electricity generation, reducing the potential for diversification, and at the same time ignoring the possibility of putting ourselves at the forefront of a niche new area of agricultural innovation. So I am emphatically opposed to Part A. It is an effective ban. I'm prepared to support Part C. I will probably vote against Part B because I think it isn't necessary and I don't particularly like the thought of that particular policy direction. But I would urge members, whatever they're planning to vote on, B or C, please do not support Part A. It isn't necessary. We have the potential to do something good. Let's keep our options open. The present system works. As the Minister has explained, I'm very pleased to be back in alignment with the Minister. And he has explained quite clearly the tests that already apply. That is enough. It has worked. It has led to the withdrawal of some systems. But let's not tie our hands behind our back anymore.
Thank you, Deputy. The next speaker is Deputy Gorst.
Thank you, sir. This is the place where I'm not delivering the speech that the Minister may have wished for. I have handed it to the Chief Minister. I'm not sure he's keen on delivering it either. But let's see. We're not there yet. If I were to deliver the Minister's speech, she would be opposing the proposal for many of the reasons that other members have said. Obviously, so I currently enjoy representing St Mary, St One and St Peter, and members will know that one of the proposed sites that the JEC were seeking to build a solar array on was in St Mary. And I'm particularly pleased to follow the last speaker, because actually I think he put his finger on the real argument here, because the JEC, of which I'm a great supporter, have done a fantastic job over the years in supplying, when other places have seen an increasing cost of energy and electricity, they have managed, through their foresight, through the connectivity to France, to provide energy at a competitive price to islanders and largely carbon neutral. We remind ourselves that the EDF's electrical supply is mostly supplied by nuclear. I think nuclear is 86.6%, renewables are 12.4%, and fossil fuels is 1%. So that's what EDF supply. We, of course, have also some on-isle generation, so our total isn't that high. There is some on-island generation as well. The point being that the climate report which the Minister recently published said that generation and change in generation is not going to help us meet our net zero targets. So this is not about meeting net zero. It's generally been the case that if someone has said, are you in favour of solar panels, most people would think that yes, they were a general good and they are the right thing to do. But that, of course, the reason we're seeing that happen all across Europe and elsewhere is because they currently do not have carbon neutral energy. But the JEC have done a fantastic job in ensuring that we do. There's also been a number of comments in reference to price volatility arising out of the war in Iran. And so members that may have listened to the comments of the Chief Executive of Centrica in the UK will know that different forms of energy have a different relationship to the international energy market. And therefore, in the UK, they will see, as we are seeing, an increase in the price of fuel arising out of that volatility. But in the UK, where a lot of heating is undertaken by gas, that's a separate energy market, and they are not seeing at this point the same increase. And so I do have confidence in the JEC that they will continue to negotiate ably with EDF as they have done in the past. And so we come to the point really which Deputy Renouf made about resilience. Do these sites and the potential 5% of generation over the year, does that add sufficient resilience, resilience to supply and resilience to help with price volatility? I think it's a difficult argument to make that it does, because it is such a small percentage. The argument that Deputy Renouf was making is only an argument that works if they are not just going to do the current 3 or 4 sites, but they are going to massively expand those sites in order to give proper energy resilience. And my view is that if that is where the JEC want to go, then we should properly have the debate and the consultation and understand what the implications are for the green and pleasant land. Maybe I shouldn't use that phrase in relation to Jersey, because it's better associated with other places. But the green and pleasant land that we have fought in this Assembly and in planning committees. I can't think any member of this Assembly has ever not had to fight for a bit of green space in their own parish in front of the planning committee. That's why, sir, I have every respect for those members who put themselves forward to be on the planning committee, because it's a job I don't think I'd ever have the stomach for. We have fought to protect that land, because resilience is not just about energy resilience, which I think JEC provide for us, and I don't think they should demur from that, but it's also about other elements of resilience, and that, of course, is food resilience. And our farming community are, through the good offices of obviously the individual farmers, because actually it's about individual businesses and people undertaking hard graft, but through the good offices of the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development, have felt a rejuvenation and hope for the future. Together, of course, with his colleague, the Minister for the Environment. But there is more to do, because food resilience is actually the real answer to the resilience that we might face from global insecurity. And therefore, I don't think we should rush to say that these solar arrays are going to give us benefit. If we are really net zero zealots, and perhaps members will not be unaware that I am sceptical because of the cost that I think it will place upon the most vulnerable in our community, and it's most difficult for them to get to a net zero place. But if we really are of that view, then the difficult issues around oil and transport and heating oil, they are the issues that need to be tackled. It's not me saying that. That is what the Climate Resilience Report, recently published, I think, by the Minister, says. And so the net zero argument is not an argument that's relevant to this. But as I say, it is in relation to resilience of energy. And I've always been of the view, sir, that one of the issues that we have not properly addressed, because if we are to be energy resilient, there are two elements to that. There's not just the island position, but there's individuals' positions. It should absolutely be the case that resilience, individuals should be able to self-generate and be resilient as individuals, as families, and as businesses. And so this is, to my part, well drafted by the Deputy, because it's talking about presumption on agricultural land. Not a presumption against businesses on brownfield sites or at the side of their farm shed from doing these solar arrays. It's the agricultural land. So we should be seeing more of that, not less of it. So that's where I think the resilience element comes in. But I do think every member equally is open to that wider consultation, that wider debate with the JEC about what future resilience looks like, and not just making an assumption about solar arrays. And the reason I say that is I fully respect Deputy Rob Ward's view that he enjoys seeing as he travels around, I think he said, which is interesting in itself. As he travels around, he enjoys seeing whether it's onshore wind farms or offshore wind farms or solar arrays. That of course is fine. But we do know from people who live next door to these pieces of kit, whether that's onshore wind farms, the difficulties that they encounter because they are bad neighbours. And I think the same can be said, because I think Deputy Alex Curtis picked up on it, just about how they look. And that argument has still to be had, of course, about the offshore wind farm. Because if we're going to deliver an offshore wind farm, and again I'm sceptical for all sorts of reasons, but not least of which is where we're going to sell it to, because the cost of building energy resilience on island from a offshore wind farm would be monumental. We'd be talking about billions of pounds. But it is possible that you could use it to sell elsewhere. And that's the thing that I think we're looking at, it's the thing that the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development has looked at, and it continues to look at and work with his colleague on. But again, we shouldn't underestimate the cost of regulation of that thing, because you don't just build it and it all nicely comes out of the ground. You have, it's a very resource-intensive process to regulate that. And so, sir, which is most unusual for me, I find myself not in alignment with my ministerial colleagues, despite what some of them say to me during other debates during this session. And I am, for all of those reasons, and I ask members to think carefully about them. It's not a criticism of anybody, it's thinking about the actuality and the facts of where we find ourselves. I am going to be voting for certainly part A and B, and I understand that C is already happening, because otherwise I'd be quite cautious about C as well. But if it's happening, who am I to stop it? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy.
So could I ask for a point of clarification?
Yes. Deputy Gorst, do you give way for a point of clarification?
Of course I do, sir.
So of the energy that we import from France, 1/3 of that is sustainable. Could the Minister clarify what he said in his speech?
Minister, are you able to clarify?
Well, those are not the numbers I've got, sir, so if the Minister is saying something else, then I have other numbers and I could, of course, be wrong. I have been wrong before, sir.
So the next speaker is the Connétable of Trinity.
Thank you, sir, and I'm pleased to follow the last speaker, Deputy Gorst. And I would agree with him that being a member of the Planning Committee has not been a popularity contest. And I'm in the fortunate position of not needing to win any votes. So I will actually give you my view rather than that of a member of the Planning Committee. But I believe we live in a relatively small island where land is a valuable, finite resource. And I think that committing so easily to locking up that land for 40 years, that's half of how long most people are going to live, and hopefully half as long as I hope to live. But we aren't actually seeing any real benefits from the agricultural use that's being given this. Okay, we're seeing a few sheep grazing underneath these solar panels, but is that really going to sustain us when the tide turns and food security for us becomes even more critical, and we actually wake up and realise that we've been for so long been getting cheap food from our farming industry, and we really need to pay the true value. So I think that a lot of these locations for these solar farms is driven not by the fact that the land is not much use for anything else, but its proximity to the grid, so that the JEC can complete their work quite easily by hooking it up. I'd be more than happy to support it going on brownfield sites which are of absolutely no use to anything else, where the land has been ruined by activities in the past. But I think we need to be sure we preserve as much of our good agricultural land as we can, and I think that there should be a strong presumption against solar farming in those locations. So, for all that, I'm really in favour of keeping all our options open at the moment. I think there are other renewable sources of energy, and before we lock up our land for 40 years, I think that those should all be thoroughly explored. So I'm afraid I will be unusually voting to support this proposition in all its parts. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Connétable. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Lehegaran.
Thank you, sir. I couldn't agree more than with the Connétable of Trinity. I spent part of 2 terms on the Planning Committee, and for the record, sir, I voted against the one at St Clement and I voted against the one at Sorrel, because I do not like to see big, large swathes of solar panels across agricultural land. The other thing is that what a lot of people forget is that the impact on the environment and the impact on the coastal parts of the countryside. If you look at the one at Sorrel, it is impactive. That is my view, sir, and I stick with it. The thing that I find interesting, sir, and most people in this assembly will know of what's been going on in my personal life over the last 7 years, which has come to recent conclusion. I was looking to buy a property which had agricultural land with it. And so I, along with my husband, said, right, I need to apply for permission to buy the land that is with that property. Because strangely enough, you cannot buy land unless you're an agriculturalist or horticulturalist. And it has to be, I think from my memory, £40,000 of your income before you're allowed to buy it. And I did question, and I would suggest that this is something that may need to be looked into, that I think people are buying land when they're actually, as the Deputy said, I'm not convinced that it's not against the 1974 law, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. The Constable of St Mary.
Thank you, sir. The application for the solar farm in St Mary has already been mentioned, and as Constable of that parish, I perhaps have a greater interest than most in the proposition. When the application was first submitted, I received a deluge of enquiries as to what I was going to do about it, and one question was, what was the parish view? At that stage, I said, the parish doesn't have a view. It's not right for one member of the community, i.e. the constable, to take it forward. But what you should do is to put your representations on the website and make public objections. And in doing so, I referred to the fact that it wasn't individual politicians that should sway the argument, but the planning committee themselves who would look at the policies and take a view on that. And having been to a planning application, they have the policies in front of them, they refer to them as their Bible and make decisions. And to a large extent, I maintain that. I do not wish to fetter the discretion of the planning committee who are trained in these areas. There is a contest between competing policies. That is something they have to face all the time. And generally speaking, I am content with that. That said, sir, I note that the Environment Minister in his submission said that there was no need for A because there already is a presumption against doing something on agricultural land other than husbandry. And part of me says, well, that is the case, and it's already there, then clearly there should be no reason why we don't pass A, because it's not making any difference. And it does actually give impetus and emphasis on the fact of agriculture. And on that agriculture use, I was interested to hear what Deputy Balish said some months, maybe a year ago now. I did take up the point about the 1974 law and whether reference to good husbandry was actually a separate decision-making avenue to go down, and I took it up with the Minister and the JFU, and the answer came back, as far as I'm concerned, that the Environment Department have various people experienced in these areas, and an officer would take that into account and would determine accordingly. And that takes me on to, I hesitate to mention it, sir, but the role of the JFU in this. I sense they are in an awkward position here. If determination of an application depends on the quality of the land, I suspect the JFU is the first port of call. The JFU, of course, is made up of members who are farmers, and they will want their maximum return from their land, and I can see that they are put in a difficult position should a member actually want to sell land to an organisation which will give him a better return than allowing it to be used for agriculture. And I simply pose the question or ask that the Environment Department or Planning Department, whenever they do consider the value of agriculture, they do actually look for an objective source to determine the value of that agriculture and not rely on people who have a vested interest. So I'm not quite sure what that leaves me, sir, in voting. As I say, sir, I've obviously received representations to keep the fields green. And I have to say that the most curious of the competing policies is that seems you're more likely to get planning permission if the solar panels are hidden from view. And can it be right that in an area which notices for its tourism, we have to hide fields which themselves contribute to the value of the land? It is a curious situation, sir. But I am minded at the moment to actually follow the views of one of my own deputies in the sense that we must very much protect agriculture. If the policy is already in being that they already do that in accordance with current policies, then part of me says that there's therefore no reason why I should not adopt paragraph A, because it's not actually adding anything other than emphasising the problem. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conatel. The next speaker is Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. As a St. Helier deputy, I find in myself actually very aligned with what Deputy Ghost and Conatap of Trinity and actually my fellow deputy Meryl Hagaret said. And why it's that? When the first time I saw solar panel field, we've been invited as states members and been told the story about CHIP. I found very exciting. I thought, oh, it's a great idea. It's working. But the next thing that I know is we did have several fields allocated for education estate during the Bridge and Island plan. This field's still there, and we did find difficulties, and some of the soundings that we got from the landowners, but maybe we don't need to develop them to education estate and develop plain fields. Maybe we can put solar panels there. Now, Deputy Ghost talked about wind farms, correct? The people around us raised if we do have a tidal, if we can have a nuclear, there are so many options. And Deputy Jean's proposition actually still needs to be developed. We still need to have energy strategy that should be developed by the end of the year. So position that I decided to take now, I will support Deputy Tadia with his proposition on all 3 paragraphs until the full strategy for energy will be presented and the decision can be made. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak? 2 speakers. Deputy Morell, I saw your light first.
Thank you, sir. I actually pick up from Deputy Gardner. There was something that Deputy Gardner, she's well within her rights to support all 3 parts, of course, entirely up to her. But it was an interesting thing she said, I will support them until we get the energy strategy. I'm afraid I must advise Deputy Gardner that it isn't possible to support a proposition for a limited length of time. And once it's supported in perpetuity until another proposition comes in and changes that. And actually, that is really what I want to say, because one of the things I really struggle with in the Assembly, and I struggle with it in this proposition, I struggle with it in the cash proposition earlier. Interestingly, both from Deputy Tadia. It's the absolute nature of these propositions, sir. It's the absolute...
Sorry, Deputy Morell, we're just checking on quorum. Just one moment. Can I invite members to return to the chamber? Thank you. Deputy Morell, please continue.
Thank you, sir. Yes, as I was saying, the thing I struggle with is the absolute nature of these propositions. Because what I see the States Assembly does time after time in many different ways is it it concedes to these absolute propositions, which then ties the island in knots, because the island basically runs out of options. And this is yet another proposition that stops the island having options. And that's a real problem for a tiny island in the sea, which doesn't have many options to start with, because we've only got so many resources, and we've only got so much land, and we've only got so many people. You know, I am not a great fan of fields turning in, you know, having solar on them, personally. But that doesn't mean I can't see the value in some areas having solar power. I think the letter to us all from the Jersey Electricity Company gives some very good points as to why in some areas you may want to use solar. I mean, when I did visit the solar installation at St. Clement, I did quiz the kind of site foreman, the developer, a lot about the use of, can it be, you know, can it really be used for agriculture? Is this something that, is this real? And the answer is very much coming back that yes, this is real. Now, again, I find it interesting, the language people use, you know, oh, having a few sheep grazing. It's like, well, when last time I looked in a field with livestock in it, I saw a few cows grazing. That doesn't mean that there's not a dairy industry in Jersey just because a few cows are grazing in the field. So kind of this diminishing of things such as sheep grazing. You know, there are sheep farmers in this island. Sheep farmers need somewhere to graze their sheep. If they can't graze their sheep, they can no longer be sheep farmers. It's really simple. So it's not just some sheep grazing, it's actually something which is really important for sheep farmers. Equally, you can grow crops under those solar mounts as well, and you can have other livestock. So yes, they can be used in agriculture, and that agricultural use can be maintained. So really, you know, the large issue is it's about the eyesore nature of these solar installations. And that's where, you know, that's where I struggle a little bit. I don't think they look great, but I do know that the Jersey Electricity Company is doing a lot in terms of tree planting around these fields, but obviously it takes a few years for trees to grow to the heights that they're meant to grow to. These are hedges, and so it will be a few years before they are shielded by those hedgerows. But those hedgerows themselves will attract all sorts of wildlife into them, thereby creating a good resource. The Jersey Electricity Company talks about the hedging element of having solar power in Jersey. And it's a limited element, but every little bit that we have which doesn't expose us to global markets, particularly at the moment, is a little bit less that we have to pay for our energy as islanders. And yesterday I was at the Cost of Living group, and naturally the cost of living was what was being discussed, and we're being told that cost of living is the #1 issue as you go into this matter. And it was interesting because, again, solar came up in that discussion, and I actually corrected a gentleman who spoke about the matter, who seemed to think that the cost of living would fall if we were all able to have solar panels on our houses. I actually had to correct him and say, no, actually, you'd find that energy prices rose if we were all to put solar panels on our houses, because that kind of random nature of those of us who can afford to put solar panels on our houses versus those who can't afford to put solar panels on our houses means that the JEC still has to have 100% of its electricity network in place, but only the wealthier people would be able to afford solar panels. Therefore, everyone else would be left on the grid and would be having to pay the full costs of the electricity company's grid maintenance, etc. Thereby they would have fewer people sharing a larger burden of cost. So you would see likely in that situation energy bills rise as a result of solar panels. To some extent, that's one of the reasons why the JEC, I'm sure, would not want to see us go to an enormous percentage of our electricity coming from solar, because it likely would put up the cost. There are balancing issues, massive technical issues around balancing. That's why batteries, as the Minister mentioned in his speech, would be needed. So there is a naturally self-limiting amount of energy that I believe the electricity company would ever want to gain from solar power, because the benefit to the island has a limit, quite simply, and it's unlikely, I think, that they would, in fact, in their letter they talk about 0.6% of agricultural land is what they were intending to use. It must be said that 0.6% of any amount is very small. And so, you know, we come back again to there is no threat to the island's agricultural land from that perspective, that, you know, we're not going to see 20, 30, 40, 50% of the island being turned over to solar panels. We're talking about 0.6%. And so it does come back down again to the kind of eyesore nature of the issue. And so really the argument I make is that I agree that we shouldn't be supporting Parts A and Parts B because they are so prescriptive and they cut off future islanders from making choices. And I do find it quite incredible that we have this ability in this assembly to say that we want to stop future islanders, usually younger than us, from making choices that may benefit them. Why? We have a whole planning system. My point really on this is that every case should be on its own merits. So we have seen St Clement and Sorrel have been passed and they're being constructed, but we've also seen other areas being rejected by the planning system. And another one as a result of that, because of public pressure, etc., being taken off the table. That, to me, is the proper way to manage this. It's on that case-by-case and site-by-site basis, rather than us today in March of 2026 deciding that we will bind the hands of future generations forevermore to not do something. And I just think that's, may I say, slightly arrogant, sir? Is that too much to say of us as an assembly, not of any one person, but of us as an assembly, to think that we at this point in time know better than the future? I don't know. I just find it a bit too much. I do have to say, sir, that I am concerned in general, as Minister for Sustainable Economic Development, in the breakdown of agricultural land, and I think, and by that I mean it being used. I think Deputy Alex Curtis talked quite rightly about domestic curtilage creeping in. Somebody said to me there's a lot of equine use, which is, I think, does probably come under agriculture. I'm not entirely sure. I won't ask the Attorney General. But what I will say about equine use, and there's been a huge growth in equine use, is that from a biodiversity perspective, equine use is not great. There was somebody told me a joke the other day that when you see horses in the field, there are only ever two, maybe maximum of 3 species in that field. There's the grass, there's the horse, and there's from time to time a human being. But outside of that, there's not many other species in such fields because, I mean, we know that where horses are, you have to actually remove a lot of flora because it's dangerous to the horse. So we have many other things that are taking our agricultural land away, not so much solar photovoltaics. I think somebody did mention in their speeches agri-solar or agri-photovoltaic kind of research. And I know there was a proposition, there was a plan to actually have an agri-photovoltaic research centre in Jersey. Well, that could have been quite an impressive addition to Jersey's society and economy. But that won't go ahead now because the site where that was being suggested has been withdrawn. And so we can see how Jersey, again, puts itself in a position where it really turns people away from the island, and it really actually just says, no, we don't want things, because we're very, very good at saying no. And in this case, I just think we have to come back to the fact that Deputy Tuddier's proposition, coming from a petition, I accept, is very definitive. No. It's a big no. And that's the no for future generations. And I'm not sure, those future generations are just 4 or 5 years away, potentially. And I'm not sure that's the best thing for the island. I do trust the planning system. It's not just the planning committee, but I think the planning committee do good work and that they are very well placed to assess, having sat on it myself, every site on its own merits. I think obviously officers come before that and ultimately an independent planning inspector comes opposite. To me, that's what we should do, because otherwise we as an assembly just close doors, and we love closing doors. And that puts us in very difficult positions when it comes to the future. So, sir, I am at the moment, like others, of the view that A and B are areas that can't really be supported. I think it is worth saying that C, whilst I completely support it, but there are massive limitations to putting things on buildings. Buildings don't have the structural capabilities. It is more expensive. So the price is much higher. So again, that's one reason why kind of green fields are preferred to be used, because that ultimately means a lower cost of electricity. I would like to say, and somebody did mention this area, I am also, it's Deputy Philip Balash, I'm also of the view that Part A is quite interesting in that it doesn't actually specify that there should be a presumption against solar ground mounts on agricultural land in the planning process. It talks about there being a presumption against, but it doesn't say in which law or which system. And I do find that to be difficult because, again, I don't know why the Environment Minister would naturally know that that then talks to the planning system or talks to the land leasing law or talks to any other law that we come in. So I think there is a deficiency in a technical deficiency in A, which also makes it difficult to support because it has enormous ambiguity. So I leave it there, sir, and I'm sure people will be greatly relieved. But I needed to try to do Deputy Alex Curtis a bit of a favour, sir. So I thought I'd speak for 12.5 minutes. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Morel, Deputy Gardner has asked if you'd accept a point of clarification.
Yes, sir.
Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. I would like if the deputy could clarify when he interpreted my until that whether he's suggesting that there will be no opportunity for the future assembly to have an informal debate once all options for energy will be presented. Because this is what I meant in my speech.
So I don't know if there'll be a formal debate after that, but what I do know is that debate wouldn't necessarily change the terms of this proposition, sir, and would unlikely have any impact on this proposition, sir.
Thank you. The next speaker is the Constable of St John.
Thank you, sir. So I've listened with interest to the debate. I'm not sure if something's happening in the next few weeks, but it seems to me that might be the case. So in St John's, sir, we went through lengthy discussions with the Jersey Electric Company about whether or not to site solar panels on agricultural land. So we rejected a number of sites close to the village, but we looked at the site at Sorrel, sir, with great interest. And I have to say, in St John, we have a Committee Rural de Saint Jean who look at planning matters, and they looked at this with great interest. I have to say, one of the members of that committee was a neighbour to the site, and so he looked at it with extreme interest, did a lot of research. Another one is a photographer, sir, so we've heard about the views, and sir, that person expressed their view on the views. So when I'm at Sorrel, sir, walking, which is quite frequent, I'm always looking across to Sark, Guernsey and Greve de Lec. I'm not looking where I've come from, and I dare say other people do similar. So I have to say Jersey Electric worked really hard with us because we took a lot of convincing. But we're open-minded and we were happy to be convinced if they could meet those arguments. We had not only several meetings with that committee elected by parishioners, fellow parishioners, we also had drop-ins at the parish hall, and I can tell you there were some cynics that arrived, and most of them went away happy with the arguments that were put. The environment features highly, and in the area at Sorrel, it is in the national park, sir, and we're also proud of the fact that the choughs are there, sir. And so one of the areas we asked the developers to go away to and talk to Durrell and to ensure that the choughs weren't going to be impacted by this installation. So I believe that the maintenance program that's in place, we're going to see better husbandry of that land, and it has to be said that the land at Sorrel, where these are sited, wasn't great land, sir. There's a lot of stone there, not particularly good, but as if Deputy Curtis wants to venture up to St John in the future, I'm sure he'll share the sheep there, because we look forward to them arriving and not just being on the cliffs. So 12 years ago, and I should say, sir, that the power that's going to be generated from this array could generate up to 40% of the power required to power parishioners' homes in St John. Now, clearly that will be different at different times of the year, and I'm told by the Chief Executive of Jersey Electric that the output of St Clement's has far exceeded their initial hopes, sir, because perhaps it's because we had a good summer last year, but they're very pleased with the output from there. I'm not sure that I would have been as supportive of the St Clement installation as I was of the one in St John, sir, because I think every case should be judged on its merits. We shouldn't have a blanket ban, and we shouldn't open the door that they can go everywhere. Every case should be on its merits. We have high hedges, and where there aren't hedges that are established, new hedges have been planted. So in a previous life, sir, I think it was about 12 years ago, I tried to get solar panels put on the roof of a building so that we could power our electric vans. And as Deputy Morel has just said, not all roofs are suitable to sustain solar panels. I had 2 very large containers which contain batteries ready to come all the way from Guernsey to save the energy generated in the day so that we could charge the vehicles at night, sir. Unfortunately, that wasn't possible because of the strength of the roof. And that is why it took us almost 2 years working with Jersey Electric to come to an agreement as government, to have a framework agreement where we can put forward sites and they can put forward sites. But be under no illusions, not all of our structures are capable. And I'm sad to say, sir, Oakfield is a fantastic facility. It's a massive investment for us. But unfortunately, we had to design the roof in such a way that it can't take solar. We really wanted the sports facility there. I'd have loved to have seen solar arrays on the roof, but unfortunately, when we did the value engineering, we had to remove that capability. So we have got car parks, part of car parks, buildings, schools, a whole array of facilities that I look forward to seeing in the coming months and years with solar arrays. But I wouldn't rule out putting solar on fields in the future if the field is suitable, if it's not going to impact on neighbours, if it's going to enhance the environment. I think we should have an open mind, sir. So I shall be opposing A and B, but supporting C. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conatop. The next speaker is Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I have been reading the petition that was set out in Deputy Tadier's report, and it's very complex. It's compared to some of these online petitions. I mean, there are quite a few. It's not very concise, a bit like my speeches. But what seems to be apparent is it's very much done in the context of some specific planning applications, which were considered by the planning committee, and the way in which. And then they're very different from the content of the proposition that's brought by Deputy Tadier, which is a lot more general. Because when I read those petitions, I feel like there's an element of NIMBYism. I mean, and it could well have been justified. I'm not saying that there was no reason for an objection in that case, but there's always a problem when planning policies allow certain development to occur that a lot of people say, well, I don't want that in my backyard. So when we come to Deputy Tadier's proposition, the first 2 parts, A, and somebody's mentioned, it says there will, I believe that's Deputy Morel, it says that there shall be a presumption against solar ground mounts. Well, that presumably has to be a planning policy. And then B, to request the Minister for Environment to consider strengthening protections for the loss of agricultural land to solar ground mounts in the next island plan. Well, again, that is planning policy. So I'm not comfortable because I feel like the Estates Assembly is being asked to make decisions which really should be the subject of propositions brought at the time that planning policies are being reviewed. And maybe this forum is just being used as an opportunity for members to show their views in that respect, in which case perhaps the deputy might say so. So in terms of actual effectiveness, they're not effective, but whether this is just offering members an opportunity to say that they object to these things. And as I believe other speakers have said, this is quite nuanced. It does raise the whole question about energy policies and the quality of agricultural land, and indeed even the extent to which, as raised by the Councillor Bourg-Rouville, the fact that solar mounts could perhaps be used as a way of improving agricultural land. Then we come to Part C, and the Minister for Infrastructure himself has already explained to the States Assembly just now the work that has been done between him and the Jersey Electricity Company to do exactly that, to look at buildings on which solar panels could be erected. So I don't really feel that this is a proposition that is producing anything of meaningful effect other than a kind of element of posturing. And I don't really feel that it's appropriate to do that. I mean, I can inform my own, if I were standing, I could inform my own election manifesto with such content. So I won't be supporting this proposition.
Thank you, Deputy Scott. The next speaker is Deputy Jean.
It's okay. So I think most of the points have been made, and I hope that most people have probably made up their mind, and I hope that my energy strategy will be coming soon so that we can really talk about energy resilience into the future, because especially as we are in an energy crisis at this particular moment, I think it's important to make sure that as we're making this decision, we also step back and see where we are in the world at this moment. It will only get worse, and we've heard recently that there are some countries who will run out of oil within the coming month, and maybe it starts the countdown within the month. And I think that's really important to start thinking about this as an overall long-term issue when we have certain countries that can hold us all globally hostage to all our energy. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you have made a speech, so but thank you.
I decided to do that,
Yes.
so, but hopefully for members it was very short and to the point.
Yes. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? If no other member wishes to speak, then Chief Minister.
I just wanted to say very quickly, because there are, I think, strong arguments for and against. But I just wanted to point out that, of course, it's not been unheard of for this Assembly to make decisions, for them to be ignored by future governments, ministers, or assemblies. And some don't bring rescindment motions. And of course, we can make a decision today, but it will be up to the next Assembly in the Island Plan debate whether they want to change direction based on new evidence. It would be up to a future minister. This is a request to the minister, as they all are, whether the next minister would want to take a different policy approach. I would just ask members to bear that in mind. So it's largely, it's not very healthy to have these debates right at the end of a term. But I don't think we will be tying the hands of future assemblies. I'm really torn between, I'm not, the looking after our agricultural land bank for relevant reasons, because although this is only using up to 0.6%, we do have a limited supply. We're a small island, and our agricultural land is quite precious. But of course, in the provision of solar energy, we're looking at selective sites to be adjudicated on their merits or otherwise. So I'm not sure that a blanket ban now would be the right thing, even though it could be largely irrelevant, because the next Assembly, as part of the Island Plan debate, could take a completely different approach. Technology is improving all the time. I said once I'm not a big fan of wind farms, but of course wind farms are big fans. I'm not a big fan of wind farms. I'd like to see solar energy, the technology around solar. Deputy Andrews liked that one. He could that one. You know, probably our most reliable form of energy is tidal movement, because we can time that to the sort of nearest few inches and a few minutes of time. And if we could harness that with the correct technology, I think that's where the future of our renewable lies. But of course, that's some way off. So, not sure which way I'm going to vote. Possibly, I will not support A and haven't decided yet, and support B and C. So, but I just wanted to make clear that this talk about we're tying the hands of future generations, we're not. This Assembly remains a right to quite rightly change its mind based on future information, future policy. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chief Minister. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and I call upon Deputy Tadier to reply.
Thank you, sir. First of all, sir, can I thank all members who have spoken? I think this has been another engaging debate, and it's engaged members from across the Assembly representing different constituents. So it seems to me that some of the speeches that have been made have ignored the fact that I've amended this proposition. And I'll allude to some of those, because they seem to be talking about prohibition when that's no longer the case. We're talking still here, that's what the wording says, about a strong presumption against. And what it does is it puts the onus on the applicant to make a case, and I think the owner, and the minister, in fact, because we know that there are many moving parts when it comes to making a decision about whether or not to allow a wind farm on land, is that the minister has to judge it under the 1974 law, but also the Planning Applications Panel potentially has to rule on that too. And there has to be a case, which I don't think is happening at the moment, that the landowner should be saying and proving that this is no longer viable agricultural land, and they can't find somebody else to currently farm it. And I think that's the point that's not happening. So there's so many moving parts in this, which I would say politely are suboptimal, that there's so much margin for error. And this is why I think we're seeing this proliferation of solar panels across our island, which wouldn't be happening, I suspect, if systems were more robust. So there's a book that I've started reading, which I look forward to having a bit more time at some point to continue to read. The title of it, sir, is borderline unparliamentary, but it's not rude, I don't think. It's called Eat, Poop, Die, by an author called Joe Roman, and it's about how animals make our world. And why do I refer to that? Because it starts off in the first chapter by something I didn't know about, that something remarkable happened in 1963 and between 1963 and 1967 off the south coast of Iceland, so about 32 kilometres south to southwest off the coast of Iceland. And what happened is that there was a volcanic eruption, and a small island gradually started to rise up from the bed of the ocean, and it formed a completely new landmass, a new island. It's a bit like if the constable of St. John were walking in Sorrel, and when he was looking across the paternosters to Sark and possibly Guernsey, and on a good day he might even see Alderney up there. It happens more often than we think. He would have gradually seen some smoke coming up from the seabed, and there would, hey presto, all of a sudden a new island would have appeared, potentially a new Channel Island, although the French may have also wanted to lay claim to that. We'll see. And that's exactly what happened, and it's called Surtsey. So, you know, that could be the name of a Channel Island, couldn't it? Surtsey, the missing Channel Island, but actually it's situated off Iceland. And that island was of particular interest to scientists, because it was really a laboratory. They had a completely new island, which was pristine when it started, and they could use it as a test bed for how life would gradually start evolving there. First of all, plant life, followed by sea life in seabirds, etc., and it's grown from that. Why do I mention that, sir? It's because there is a saying which I think has already been made in this debate. I look across to the Constable of Trinity, and I think he came close to saying it if he didn't say it in these words. He said, "We're not making land anymore." So in Jersey, we don't make land anymore. We sometimes reclaim it, but that's an expensive, laborious process. And usually when we do it, it's on the south coast, and it's for very much the built environment. Some people say that actually, because we're quarrying in the north still, and we're sometimes reclaiming in the south, Jersey is gradually moving more and more towards the south. And that's a comment that I find very interesting. But the bottom line is, it's a fact that in Jersey, agricultural land, like all land, is at a premium. And we need to make sure that if agricultural land is being given over to any other use other than agriculture, and it could be any kind of building, then we need to be absolutely sure that when we're giving up that, and in these cases for solar panels, it's not just a case of for a few years, it's actually going to be for 30 or 40 years more than likely, because that's where the planning, the leases are happening. This is for the future generations. So when Deputy Morell stands up and says, you know, we need to be thinking about future generations, absolutely. I absolutely agree with him. I'm not quite sure how he squares that with the proposition he's about to bring to support agriculture in Jersey, when actually he's quite happy to plaster so many fields in Jersey with solar panels so that they can't be used for any meaningful agriculture. And I'm sorry that there are other interpretations and there are other legal opinions that could be made. And I think Deputy Balash hit this on the head. Were some of these applications to go to judicial review, and were the people who are moving those applications to have their own legal representation, I think very quickly the Minister for Environment would be on very thin ice in some of the decisions he's had to justify, and he'd be called upon to justify the decisions that he's been making in that regard, sir. So let me go back to the wording of what I'm proposing here. It is that there should be a presumption against solar ground mounts on agricultural land. I've taken out deliberately the wording that there should be a prohibition. So that is a much softer, a much more permissive proposition. It's one that still very much puts, of course, the onus on the applicants and those three that I mentioned at the beginning. And the second part, I think it does go most of the way, if not all the way, to alleviating the fears of the minister, because we're not binding the hands of a future minister. I mean, we've already had this in previous debates today. What we are asking is we're requesting the Minister for Environment to consider strengthening protections for the loss of agricultural land to solar ground mounts. What that does is nonetheless send a very clear message from this outgoing Assembly to the future Assembly and to the future Minister, more to the point, that a decision has been made and that one of the first jobs she or he might need to make as an Environment Minister is to consider strengthening protections for the loss of agricultural land to solar ground mounts. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If the future Minister finds that actually we have very good protections at the moment, that they only need a slight tweak, then she can proceed to do that. But if she finds that actually there needs to be some root and branch changes that need to be made, perhaps in the 1974 law, then she may very quickly, after consultation, move that. She may also look at the island plan to strengthen that. And that's why the last part, Part C, which seems to be uncontroversial, we've not really focused on that. And this is the strange bit, because we've not focused on C because I think it's highly uncontroversial. So there is a strong argument to say that we would like the Infrastructure Minister, again, this is likely to be a future Infrastructure Minister, in consultation with the future Minister for Environment, to bring forward a policy framework to promote the installation of solar panels on all suitable states of Jersey-owned buildings. But we can read between the lines there, because there have been some very good comments made, starting off with Deputy Coles, who said, you know, there are difficulties, he thinks, in St Helier South that so many buildings are not appropriate for solar panels. Well, that may be the case to an extent, but if I go on to what I think is a very helpful website from the Government of Jersey, which is called the Rooftop Solar Panel Suitability Map, I can see already lots of roofs, or roofs, depending which plural you want to choose, in St Helier South, but across St Helier and across the island that are entirely suitable. They're the ones that are the most dark red. And there are quite a lot of them, not least around the harbour, not least around La Collette area. You know, we've not talked about the industrial area of La Collette, for example, which I don't think many people would mind if there were some solar panels around there. Is it close to the JEC, by the way, La Collette? I've not checked recently. I think it might be quite close to some of their operations. So I think that there are options definitely around there, sir. So the other point I would make is that, reading between the lines, this isn't just about States buildings. What we should be doing is enabling homeowners and owners of properties to actually fit these on their properties. There should be loans being given out by ministers, because we can't see everything through the lens of the JEC. This isn't just about the JEC's purchasing power and selling power. This has to also be seen as a social commodity. This has to be seen as disruptive technology where people can get their bills down. I think Deputy Renov said it. He said, in the same way that JEC might want to hedge themselves, he and other potential users of solar would do it for exactly the same reasons. You know, Deputy Ward made some very good comments, I think, about the fact that we should be putting these on schools, we should be putting them on car parks, and I immediately think of B&Q, where I presume the JEC have got them exactly as he envisaged on car parks. On a sunny day, you can drive up to Powerhouse, B&Q, park your car under those solar arrays. It's particularly helpful if you've got a dog in the car. You leave the windows down. The car's not going to get too hot. You pop into B&Q for 5 minutes, and you come out, and your car is very cool. And in the meantime, on top of that, energy is being generated. You know, we can be putting them on our car parks, because we can have solar panel that doesn't need to go and be fed back to the JEC. It can just be fed straight into the charge points for the cars there, if that's possible. I mean, there are other electricians and scientists who will be able to tell us about that, but that shouldn't be beyond the wit of technology. So I was also very interested for the Deputy Constable of Grooville. He told us extensively about his cyst problem, that he suffered from potato cysts, nematodes, but he did say that solar panels can be really useful for that. But what I'd say is it doesn't take 40 years to clear a field of potato nematodes. I think that actually, ideally, we shouldn't be getting to that point in the first place. And I know farmers in here will know about crop rotations, and it's preferable to not get to that point rather than having to clear the nematodes from your fields. And that can happen through good land management and good agricultural husbandry, which I know others will know more about than myself. So I think saying that we need solar panels to play a part there, it might be the case if you could just have solar panels for 3 or 4 years, but that isn't what the proposals are. This isn't what we're seeing here. And I was also interested to hear about the coaties that are not visible. So there are some less visible coaties in Jersey. The Minister, I think, for the Environment said that we're binding the hands of future ministers in the island plan. I don't think we are doing that. I think we're giving a clear instruction here. This is what we'd like to see, but it's over to you, Minister. It's over to the next Assembly. And I don't think that the current policy has necessarily been reflected properly in the permissions that we're seeing granted to JEC in these applications. I also notice, of course, that when it comes to environmentalism generally, and the interesting thing about this debate is that we're actually juxtaposing two forms of environmentalism in tension. So it is absolutely correct that solar is great. And I think if we had a big island which wasn't inhabited, I'd have no problem in probably covering a lot of the island in solar panels, but we don't have an island which is 200 square miles. We have an island which is 45 square miles. And the land is at a premium. So the old adage of reduce, reuse, recycle, I think I would come back to the Minister. There's been a lot of focus on generating electricity. Where has the focus been on reducing energy consumption in the first place? So we do need to have an insulation programme. If I were being cynical, I would argue that there's no incentive for the JEC to roll out insulation programmes. I think they do that anyway. I think they're generally a very good company, and they do give advice on changing your boilers. But ultimately, you know, any company wants to sell more electricity, I suspect. And I think any shareholder in a company that sells electricity wants to get as much revenue as possible. So we do come to this argument about the conflict of interest, which I don't think has been mentioned up to this point, where we have ministers who I think have really spoken often, not from a point of view necessarily representing constituents and the countryside concerns, but actually acting more as salesmen for the JEC. And I think that's a problem when we don't have an electricity regulator, an energy regulator in Jersey, where that presumably falls to government, but they're also the beneficiaries of the electricity that is sold to islanders. So there are lots of problems here in this context. Deputy Curtis made a good point saying that it doesn't look nice, they don't look nice, and I think that's probably the least of our problems. I think they may not look nice, but they also can't be used for meaningful agriculture. That's my main concern. So this idea that, you know, they can have sheep on them, here's a revelation. You don't need to have solar panels on a field to put sheep in your field. In fact, it's probably much better for the sheep if there aren't solar panels getting in the way. And if you want to have shelters for the sheep, you can build shelters for the sheep and put a few solar panels on top of them, and you can generate electricity. So you know, let's not get into another form of greenwashing here, which is to say that actually these are great and you can do more, because actually you can do far less types of farming by covering your whole fields in solar panels. That's just axiomatic. So domestic curtilage, I think he said, is also a threat. But here's an idea. Maybe government should be looking to secure fields. Maybe there should be an idea to set up a land bank. Because if what we're saying here is that JEC are effectively acquiring fields or leasing them, I don't know if they're buying them, and they're putting solar panels on them, there is an argument, of course, that they're being kept for agricultural use in the future, but there is an opportunity cost that's not happening at the moment. Another question I think that arises from all of this that hasn't been asked yet is, should we be opening the grid to competition in the same way that we've opened up the telephone network to competition? So we know that at one point in Jersey, there was only one provider of telecommunication services. There was Jersey Telecom. The government, the states own the infrastructure. JT still own the infrastructure, but they were required through JCRA policy and under law to allow others like Shaw to access the services that they provide. Could it be that actually, when it comes to solar, JEC shouldn't be the only company that negotiates with homeowners? Because again, they have a monopoly status. Could we get to a point where actually, because we want to innovate in Jersey, I'm told, Jersey is open for business, should we put a message out to say, like the Chief Minister did yesterday, saying to Lidl and Aldi that he would welcome them to Jersey? Should we be saying that actually we would welcome other solar panel providers to come to Jersey and to use the grid, and we will grant you access to grid so that there's competition in the electricity network? Could we do that? Or should we simply be relying on JEC to have their monopoly of fields? Because there is a counterfactual there. So even if we think that putting solar panels on fields is a great thing, why should the JEC have the monopoly to do that? Deputy Balash, I think, was quite right to highlight the 1974 law. There is that question that's now in the public domain, a written question with the answer there. And I think there are different interpretations of that. It is up to the minister to justify saying that a field needs to be used for non-agricultural purposes. Fields should not be used for non-agricultural purposes without the minister's permission. And where he's given those permissions, he needs to justify it. And the future minister will need to justify that. I don't see any of those justifications having sufficiently been made up until now. Now, Deputy Ward says that he looks at a field full of solar panels and says, these are great, because he looks at them and says they're great, they're generating clean electricity. I look at them with a bit more of a problematic approach. I look at them and think, what a shame. We already know that we don't have much in the way of food security, and that we're giving over these fields to profit because actually it's more profitable for the landowner who may not be the same as the tenant farmer. It's an easier way for that person to make money. And I'm thinking Jersey is slowly losing its way, that these solar panels could be put on roofs, but instead they're taking up good agricultural land. That's what I think when I see solar panels on fields. I look at them and I think, actually, these could be allotments. You know, I've had an allotment in St. John for a little while, and I've recently given it up because it's too onerous. And actually, it's not great agricultural land. It's full of cooch. So if anyone knows what cooch is, and there are people who've got enough time to dedicate to that. I simply don't, sir. But you don't have to have amazing quality of agricultural land to give it over to allotments. And I would certainly prefer to see a medium field, so a field of medium quality, being given over to the thousands of people in Jersey who don't have access to even a garden where they can sit to grow a few bits of veg for themselves, to grow carrots, to grow peas, to grow Jersey potatoes, to even grow fruit. And I've seen what that can do for a small community like St. John. I've seen what it can do for a community like Le Creux, when it's a real lifeline and it creates a community for those to do it. I don't see any communities being built around these solar panel hubs in fields. It's completely, the electricity goes in, it goes out, it gets sold back to people. I don't see prices coming down for people in Jersey either. So I put those forward as a counterfactual for what these fields could be used. And I do ask, where is Deputy Renouf the champion for food security? Where is Deputy Renouf the champion for supply chain resilience? Where is Deputy Renouf the champion for local, buy local, grow local, for genuine Jersey? He seems to be saying actually that he's another one of those former ministers who's a spokesperson, a salesman for Jersey Electricity. And that's okay, but I see things slightly differently. So I'm not going to go through every speech, but I would like to make a particular point of the comments made by my colleague from the Countryside Alliance, our new party, Deputy Gorst. He's not listening. I think there was a party registered today in the Royal Court, sir, but maybe it should have been the Countryside Alliance. And he said something, he said, resilience is not just about energy, resilience is about food resilience. And so this conversation of food security has been completely absent from our considerations. But it was a question that we were asked by environmentalists, I know, in the 2022 elections, and it will be a question that comes up again in these hustings. What are you doing as a potential states member for food security? I'll tell you what we're doing. We're putting solar panels on our fields. Does nothing for food security. And if there is an issue in terms of supply chain, the issue isn't that we're worried about electricity somehow being cut off from France. We have 3 cables that run from Normandy to Jersey, and they all have the potential to bring electricity to Jersey. We only have 1 boat that brings food to Jersey, and that doesn't always run. Sometimes, for the main part, we have that 1 boat that brings freight into Jersey. We know that freight has become more expensive. The co-op have told us as a result of the flat rate freight card, food is becoming more expensive. You only need a few days of storm in the winter, or even, in fact, nowadays in the spring and in the summer, for the shelves to be empty when you go to the supermarkets. So I will give way for a point of clarification.
So, point of clarification, sir?
Yes. Deputy Jolly.
Will the Deputy agree with me that there are 2 boats most days that bring food to Jersey, sir? 1 in the morning and 1 in the evening. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Jolly.
2 boats, are they from the same company? Yeah, they're from the same company, so that's exactly what the point I'm getting to. So there's no competition in that. And if that company is having problems, as we know they do, the shelves will be empty. The way to ensure that you don't have empty shelves is to make sure that more food is being grown in Jersey, that it doesn't need to go to the UK to be packed, etc., sir. So look, let's wrap this up, sir, because I know members are getting tired. We've had a long day. It is an important debate. The bottom line is that with this amendment, it combines the flexibility If a case can be made by an applicant that they want to cover a field in solar panels, that's great, but we need to make sure there's that bar that is being met. This gives flexibility to the future Minister for the Environment to bring forward a sensible and joined-up policy to bring amendments to the law if she or he needs to. And lastly, it does give the states an opportunity to lead by example by getting their own house in order, by using their own buildings, maximising that, and sending a clear message out to the wider community. If we want solar panels, let's start by putting them on roofs, not on our green fields, sir. I do maintain the proposition, sir. And
Do you call for the appel?
And in different parts this time, sir.
Very
Thank
well.
you.
So 3 separate parts, A, B and C. Very well, the appel's been called for. I ask members to return to their seats. If all members have had the chance of returning to their seats, I ask the greffier to open the voting. Part A, yes. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes in relation to Part A of the proposition, I ask the greffier to close the voting. And the proposition has been adopted. 23 votes pour, 19 votes contra, and no abstentions.
So could we have both sets of votes, please?
Those voting for the Conotubs of Trinity, St Martin, Grouville, St One, St Mary, St Saviour, and deputies Southern, Labby, Tadier, Ahegara, Alves, Gorst, Farnham, Balash, Horray, Miles, Catherine Curtis, Rose Binno, Howell, Kovac, Wilson and Stevenson, and online Deputy Gardner. And then those voting contre, deputies, the Conotubs of St Helier, St Lawrence, St Brallard, St John, and deputies Luce, Ayer, Broadboard, Mezek, Coles, War, Renov, Feltham, Jeune, Tom Binet, Ferry, Alex Curtis, Barbara Ward, and online the Conotub of St Clement and Deputy Scott.
Thank you. So we move on to the appel in relation to Part B. Graffier's had the opportunity of loading the appel. So I ask the greffier to open the voting on Part B of the proposition. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. And Part B has been adopted. 37 votes pour, 7 votes contre, and no abstentions.
So could we just have the 7, please?
Those voting contre, the Conotubs of St Helier, St Brallard and St John, deputies Luce, Renov, Andrews and online, Deputy Scott.
Thank you. So we move on to Part C of the proposition. The greffier has had the opportunity of reloading Part C. I ask the greffier to open the voting. Members have now cast their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. And Part C has been adopted. 40 votes pour, 4 votes contre, and no abstentions.
Can we have the floor, please?
Those voting contre, the Comitab of St Mary, deputies Tom Binet, Andrews and Scott.
Thank you. So we move on to the next item of public business. And the next item of public business will be P55, which is first time buyer properties, which has been lodged by Deputy Alex.
Sir, could I test the mood of the Assembly and propose the adjournment, sir? We seem to have about 10 minutes and we're back on Monday regardless.
Is the proposition seconded?
Has the mood been tested?
Sir.
The state stand adjourned. Oh, no, sorry, no. Members are minded to adopt the proposition. Yes. The state stand adjourned to 9:30 on